George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Happy Victory Day wherever you are in the world. 77 years ago, this day, the beast of Berlin was crushed like a rat in his bunker amidst the rubble of Berlin, which had been stormed at very considerable cost, not just to the Germans, but to the Soviet Red Army that lost more than 200,000 soldiers, storming and capturing Berlin and putting an end, we thought, to Hitlerite fascism. Not that you'll hear much of any of that in the mainstream media, in any coverage, and there's not much about the victory of the great alliance between the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, China, and the British Commonwealth, and Poland, and sundry other countries. There's nothing on the news about the decisive contribution, which, as Mr. Churchill said, the Red Army broke the back of the Wehrmacht, the German military forces. 8 out of 10 of Nazi forces killed in the Second World War were killed by Russians, by the Soviet Red Army, including, of course, those brave Ukrainians that stood up to the fascist hegemon, which came crushing into their country in Operation Barbarossa. And above all, perhaps, and for obvious reasons, I salute the fighters from Ukraine in the Soviet Red Army and the partisans behind the enemy lines that gave their lives in overwhelming numbers to resist the Nazi occupation of their country. Our own little country here, Great Britain, did a thing or two as well, and I'll speak about that later. As did the United States. It would be churlish to deny it. And a happy Mother's Day to you and the rest of the world. You all drive on the wrong side of the road and you celebrate the wrong day for Mother's Day. It's not Mother's Day here, but every day is Mother's Day for me, so I send a big salute to all the mothers of the world this Sunday and every Sunday. I'll be talking about Joe Biden, about Boris Johnson, about somebody called Keir Starmer, about the British local elections and the upcoming American midterm elections. And this will be a tale of 2 TV stations. Twice as many people were waiting for us to come on air than were watching live something called Talk TV, owned by Rupert Murdoch, backed by his millions, cross-referenced and promoted by all of his media empire. But 913,000 watched us last week. 67,000 watched somebody called, what's his name again? Piers Morgan. I'll be talking for the next 3 hours to wonderful guests, so fasten your seatbelts. It's rock and roll, radio and TV with pictures.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I just want to read, if I may. I don't normally read to you. I want to read some statistics which illuminate something very important in the media landscape. As I said earlier, twice as many people were waiting for us to come on air than were watching Rupert Murdoch's Talk TV. Episode 154, last Sunday's episode, was a slightly disappointing audience. It was 913,000 people. Piers Morgan had 67,000, and his colleagues on Talk TV were oftentimes talking to 5,000 people or fewer. Episode 154 was 913,000. The YouTube stream alone was 3 times what it was in January. YouTube clips were viewed by 265,000 people. Facebook clips by 301,000 people. And TikTok, our biggest growth area of them all, I wish they would sponsor the show. Come on, TikTok, how about it? TikTok, which we've only been on for a few weeks, had 180,000 viewers. 2 clips alone, the May Day holiday to you, that was, I think, my introduction, was viewed by 77.2 thousand people. And my bit about 1 in 3 British fish and chip shops having to close was viewed by 52,000 people. The Facebook monologue was viewed by 93,000 people. I could go on and on. But here's my point. Talk TV has a promotional budget of millions of pounds. It was years in the making. It hired, I've no doubt, at a salary in the millions, Piers Morgan as its frontman. And it has completely flopped. It has completely flopped like all of the sofa politics television in Britain. Far too many of them singing exactly the same song, interviewing exactly the same people, taking exactly the same line on every matter, from domestic to international. And there's a lesson there. The reason that our numbers are exponentially larger than a multi-million-pound operation run out of Rupert Murdoch Towers at London Bridge is because we are different, because we are free. We are not just free to air, and I'll come to that later, but we are free to speak our minds. Nobody tells us what to think or what to say. That goes for me, it goes for my far more interesting guests, most of which would never be invited onto Piers Morgan's show, but who are far more interesting than the people who are invited onto his show and others. I don't dislike Piers Morgan, by the way. I just think that the contrast between our show and his is particularly stark and illuminating. But it also goes for you. You can call this show. I have no idea who you are, and I have no idea what you're going to say, what you're going to ask me. None of that would ever be attempted anywhere else in the British television business, in the world television business, because everything I've just said goes throughout what we'll call the Anglosphere. Amongst English-speaking people around the world, this show is completely unique. But it's an endangered species. And I've got to tell you, we are falling dangerously short in the audience support that you have been giving. Some people have been incredibly kind and generous, giving far more than we asked for and that I'm asking for now. A man stopped me in London today. His name was Jim Bergen. He stopped me in London and gave me £40 in cash. I've still got it in my ticket pocket somewhere. £40 in cash he gave me for your show, because he said, I watch every week. There it is. 2 20s. No, a 20 and 2 10s. That's what he gave me today, which was all the folding money that he had. And he explained he doesn't understand PayPal and websites, and he's only got a basic phone and so on. That's the kind of generosity that we are meeting. So if you are, and you know who you are, amongst those who've given really generously over the few weeks that I've been asking you to give, and it has only been a few weeks, then please take a holiday. Don't keep giving. Because I'm after that big audience, and I'm asking you only for $1. $1. Am I not worth $1? Is this show not worth $1? There's no adverts like there is on other television stations. You don't have to buy a license fee and get sent to jail if you don't to watch the mother of all talk shows. I'm asking for $1 or £1 if you are in Britain, or €1 if you are in Ireland or elsewhere in the European Union. I'm not going to keep saying it, but we're falling dangerously short. It goes without saying that I'm being paid no wages at all, zero. I'm doing this for zero. Piers Morgan is doing it for millions. But I've got to pay everybody else. And I've got to pay for this studio and the 1, 2, 3, 4 cameras and the sound and the people on the telephones. You get me? That's the last I'm going to say about it. Now, the United States spent £2.3 trillion, that's trillion pounds, on the war in Afghanistan. When they scuttled out like thieves in the night, leaving their allies in the lurch in Afghanistan, bringing back to power the very people that the whole 20-year Afghan war had been about crushing and defeating and driving out of power and keeping them out of power, they left behind $80 billion worth of material, of military hardware, oftentimes of the most sophisticated and oftentimes brand new models. 80 billion. Why do I mention it? Well, partly because the Taliban are in the news this morning, because they have tightened their hideous diktat to the women of Afghanistan about what clothes they have to wear. It goes without saying, I deplore that. But even more than deploring that, I deplore the fact that having occupied them for 20 whole years, the longest war in America's history, in Britain's history, well, not in Britain's history, we fought a 100-year war against the French and may do so again. But it's America's longest war. Having occupied them for 20 years, having killed untold tens, scores of thousands of them, maybe hundreds of thousands of them over that 20 years, and having run out on them, despite all the promises that we made, the Afghan people are currently starving. And the liberal airwaves and newsprint columns are filled with anguished people talking about the clothes that Afghan women now have to wear. What about the fact that the Afghan women are starving, whatever they're wearing or not wearing? That their children are starving? That the whole country is in a state of mass starvation? Don't we have some obligations in that? You'll see where I'm going with this in just 1 minute. But not only have we deserted them, left most of the country starving, was wringing our hands about burqas, we have stolen $7 billion of their money that they entrusted into American banks. We've stolen it, and we've given half of it to the victims of 9/11. But no Afghan was involved in 9/11. No single Afghan had anything remotely to do with 9/11. It was Saudis that did that crime. And as we now discover, with Saudi government involvement in released papers this very week, it's revealed that the Saudi government was up to its neck in the crime of 9/11. Why aren't you seizing their money instead of the poor, hungry, benighted Afghans? Now, I mention all these numbers because Joe Biden has just announced that he's going to give $33 billion to the Ukraine for more and more and more weapons. much of which is destroyed before it even gets to the battlefield, much of which is stolen and sold, including to the Russian invaders. Others of it is ending up on the dark web. Others of it doesn't work at all, including, rather embarrassingly, the £200,000 British-made missiles that didn't explode and were filmed by the people amongst whom they fell this very day. If you look for it on social media, 33 billion in a country, the United States, which is falling apart at the seams, whose students have $1 trillion student debt that they cannot pay, whose workers are on a pathetic minimum wage, utterly pathetic minimum wage, much worse than the British minimum wage, and who are increasingly unemployed, underpaid, facing rocketing inflation, prices that they literally cannot pay. Not can only pay with a grump, a growl, more about growls in a minute, but they cannot pay because of American sanctions on Russia, that great stone that the Western governments in the European Union, Britain, and the United States have struggled mightily to lift, only to drop on their own feet. This America that couldn't pass a stimulus budget, remember the stimulus budget that never passed, is going to spend $33 billion on more military hardware for a war that cannot be won and is even right now, this day, being lost, comprehensively lost. So I'm asking tonight, not my usual question, would you send Joe Biden out for a loaf? Because I wouldn't. I wouldn't expect him to come back with the right loaf or the right change or even to come back at all. But he's the president of the United States that is spending money like a drunken sailor, not on its own people, but on military equipment and material to pour into the ravenous jaws of war, the proxy war that they now openly admit is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. I don't even think he'll complete his presidential term. There's a poll up there now. Will Joe Biden complete his US presidential term? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. I'm dangerously close to 200,000 subscribers. I want to get there quick because they didn't give me a plaque for my first 100,000. I'm hoping they can't refuse me on my second. You can also vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway. Lastly, if the director will permit me overrunning my time by a minute or two, you need a heart of stone not to laugh at the plight that the Labour leader in Britain, Sir Keir Starmer, a big stewmer, a big plank of wood. You need a heart of stone not to laugh at the plight he finds himself in this Sunday. Having made Boris Johnson eating a birthday cake in the Cabinet Office during his working day on his birthday, having made that the #1 issue in British politics, having gone nuclear with Partygate, demanding the Prime Minister's resignation because he was under investigation for breaches of the COVID lockdown rules, Keir Starmer has been caught red-handed doing exactly the same thing. In fact, worse than the same thing. Because the Mail on Sunday today has published a document written in advance, therefore premeditated, giving a program for Keir Starmer in Durham, in the northeast of England, in which it's clearly stated that we'll leave our hotel where food was on offer and we'll take a walk together down to the miners' hall. What did the miners do to deserve that? And then we'll have a meeting which was not permitted under the lockdown rules, that Starmer was demanding should be more and more onerous, outgunning the Prime Minister. Every time he announced new restrictions, Starmer demanded more restrictions, earlier and more. And then it says, printed on the document, we've ordered a takeaway curry. Does everyone know what a curry is around the world? I'm sure they do. And even gave the name of the restaurant from which they were buying it. And then we'll all have alcohol and curry around the table. All of it in absolutely flagrant breach of the laws that Starmer was not just defending but was demanding should be toughened up. Lastly, on the subject of who deserves what, do the Ukrainians, on top of all the other misery and suffering of a war in their country, really deserve Bono in their underground station, foolishly called a bomb shelter, but in fact the metro built by the Soviet Union when Ukraine was a member? They've got Bono. He still hasn't found what he's looking for, you see. I hope you have been looking for a show like this. It's the mother of all talk shows.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
That was brilliant, Simon. Thanks for that jingle. I haven't properly listened to that one before. The voice is supposed to be Sir David Attenborough, who is a 90-year-old plus national icon in Britain. He does nature programs at the very highest level. And there he was in the undergrowth looking for the lesser spotted George Galloway. Will Joe Biden complete his US presidential term? A, yes, B, no. Vote on my Twitter feed, on my YouTube channel, and on my Telegram channel. Will Joe Biden complete his US presidential term? Now, it was local election day on Thursday. It was widely tipped to be a disaster for the Conservative government, a triumph for the aforementioned Sir Keir Starmer. Just for the avoidance of doubt, they're two cheeks of the same backside for me. I wish perdition on both of them. I wish both of them to resign. It was predicted to be a sweeping night of Labour victories, but it wasn't. One man who was charting it is one of the brightest young journalists in Britain. I came across him last year during my celebrated by-election in the Batley and Spen constituency, where he went under the peculiar, I thought, name, That Preston Journalist. His name is AshKarmanski. He's a progressive, independent journalist fighting for systemic change in the UK. Aren't we all, Ash? Aren't we all? Let's clear up the name first. Are you in Preston, in Lancashire? Is that the reason for the name?
That is the reason for the name, yes. Evening, George, and evening to everyone. Thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, that is the reason for the name. It's because I didn't want to use my name in the title, even though it's out there anyway. But it's just to keep my private life separate from my work life. That's why I did that.
Yeah. Well, you see, I made the mistake originally, and it worked out in your favour, of thinking it was Peston Journalist. I misread it. Peston is, of course, the pestilential, now ITV political, I suppose you'd call him a journalist, a broadcaster, a sofa host, and he's extremely annoying. So when I saw your title at first, I thought this was something to do with Peston, but it wasn't, and it was exceptionally good work. Now, you looked at the local elections on Thursday. What's your takeaway from it?
Oh, as you just correctly said, Labour the PR machine was spinning. It was going to be a night of victory after victory. One source said they were going to get between 500 and 800 new seats, take over 16 new councils, and they got absolutely nowhere near that. I think their total in the end was something like 120 odd plus councillors that they got, and took control of about 6 new councils. So Keir Starmer is obviously trying to spin it.
Yeah, but Ash, they lost control, not just of several councils, but 2 in London, where when they failed outside of London, they tried to make London emblematic until the results came in from Croydon and Tower Hamlets, my old stamping ground. They won control of 3 boroughs in London, incidentally, the richest boroughs in London.
Yep.
Mayfair is now Labour territory rather than Conservative, but they simultaneously lost control of 3 working class boroughs in London, 2 of whom have got directly elected mayors. So it was even worse. They lost control of the council and lost the powerful directly elected mayors. So if they did so badly, who did well?
You'd have to say the only party that can really claim to have done well are the Lib Dems, certainly in England anyway, because they are very often, as you know, I'm sure, the protest vote, the go-to protest vote for people. And I think that's exactly what happened, as you correctly said. And I've used your quote myself before, 2 cheeks of the same backside. We've basically got a duopoly, as you well know, that is almost a Labour-Tory coalition. And that's what we've had for the last couple of years. And again, as you just highlighted, this is the party that was set up to represent working people, for the have-nots, to make sure they have a good quality of life, workers' rights, etc. They've now lost working-class towns such as Hull, but have now taken Mayfair, probably the most affluent area in the entire country. And I think that tells you a lot.
Perhaps in the entire world. Perhaps the entire world.
Possibly.
But they lost, I think that tells you a lot. They lost Hull, and they lost Tower Hamlets. They lost 22 seats in Tower Hamlets. And they lost control of Croydon and Harrow. Not to mention the Red Wall. I saw a result, I think, from Walsall, just before I got into the studio, a late result, which showed a fall in the Labour vote of 15%. Now, I don't want to get too anatomical, but if the Tories and Labour are 2 cheeks of the same backside, and the Liberal Democrats are some way between them, what does that make the Liberal Democrats?
It's a very good question. I've always called the Liberal Democrats Tory lights, because that's the way I see them. I think they are basically yellow Tories. That's the way I see it. And you've basically got a lot of parties now that are all singing from the same hymn sheet. Yes, some people aren't happy with the government, but there's also an equal amount, I think, not happy with Labour, not happy with the Lib Dems. What's the difference between them, George? I don't think anybody could really find... You can't put a fag paper between their beliefs. It's all about this green agenda. It's all about more lockdowns and more restrictions on lives. And they all believe the same thing. Whereas go back years, of course, they had very different stances on different things. You've now got conservative socialists in power who are raising taxes left, right and centre, big state, which is what Labour used to be about, at least sometimes. But now they all just agree with each other. It's the state that people are sick of.
There's cross-dressing going on, isn't there? Sometimes
yeah,
Labour are more authoritarian than the Conservatives. Sometimes the Conservatives are more big spending, at least in their announcements. I don't know if the money ever really gets there. In a kind of old Labour way. The Liberal Democrats turn out, like Liberals everywhere, to be tyrants once you scratch them, screaming for more and more authoritarian control. I mean, Facebook is now virtually a prison camp. I hope they don't switch me off for saying that. Who's in charge of the politics of Facebook? Sir Nick Clegg, the former Liberal Democrat Deputy Prime Minister of Britain. So with all this cross-dressing going on, did it surprise you that the real winner of the election were those that didn't vote at all? The great majority of the people didn't vote for any of them.
It did, honestly, it didn't surprise me that turnout was so unbelievably low. Why? I mean, it's harsh to say it, and I respect you as an ex-politician, of course, but trust in politicians has never been fantastic, of course, and expectations are sometimes low. But the fact that people aren't going out there to vote just shows you how low trust has sunk in these people, and how little faith the public really have in them. And the duopoly, which I always talk about a lot, is the problem for that. And there's massive change needed in this country to try and give at least some parties a chance to get representation in there, because as you know, people are too scared to vote for maybe yourselves in the Workers' Party, although you did very well in Batley, of course, or they won't vote for any other fledgling party, if you will, because they're scared of letting a Tory in, or they're scared of letting a Labour MP in, and they've got complete and utter control of the whole system. And as long as we have the first past the post system, I don't believe that is ever going to change. It's sad to say.
I think you're bang on there, Ash. My wife, as you know, comes from Amsterdam. They have a proportional representation system. There's a pensioner party, got MPs. There's a cat lovers party, standing for animal rights, which has got members of parliament. Basically, if you get 5% of the vote, you get 5% of the seats. If you get 10%, you get 10% of the seats. In our country, if you look at Farage, for example, both when he was at UKIP and then when he formed his own party, the Brexit Party, they were polling millions of votes and getting no seats because the first past the post system nails down the status quo. And the problem is, I don't need to spell out a perspicacious young man like you, to change that would require those who benefit from that system to agree to change it.
And turkeys do not vote for Christmas, do they? I've never met one that will anyway. And that's the problem. These people are very, very comfortable. A lot of them have, as you know, big majorities. My local MP, for example, is Nigel Evans. If he wanted to stay there till his dying day, he could. He will never, ever lose his seat because his majority is so big. And the same can be said for a lot of these people. So I believe they believe they can basically do whatever they like, as long as they show up once every 5 years to pick up your vote in a general election. And then you won't see them again for another 5 years. And that's the way our system, as you said, it breeds the status quo. It doesn't allow for new people to come in. And there's simply no way of changing the system the way things stand now.
And that was bad enough, Ash, when the two parties were, the three parties actually, were discernibly different. When the three parties are all the same, that becomes an elected dictatorship. That becomes a one-party state. Different cheeks, they pretend to hate each other and all that, but trust me, once they go through the swing doors out the chamber, they're very far from hate each other. And so we've got a stasis here in this country. The country isn't working. And the political class can't, won't make it work. And the media, and I want to turn to the media now, the media feeds off that political class, feeds into that political class, and has no interest in changing things either. In fact, they can be reliably relied upon to do the bidding of the establishment parties. What can we do about the media? You have done wonders. You write marvelous, marvelous. That Preston report is excellent. How did you get the idea to start doing this, and how is it going?
It's going really well at the moment. I've just hit over 7,000 subscribers, which, you know, much like
Very
yourself,
good.
I don't really have a budget or anything. I just started doing this because I was sick of seeing the same old dross in the mainstream media. As you just said, they all say the same thing. They never really hold anybody to account. And if anything, people are, well, they are switching off in their droves, but I would encourage most people to simply switch off and watch programs like yours or videos like mine. And, you know, you get a different perspective. How many working class people do you ever see on the BBC or on ITV? It's unheard of. And at least people like, you know, I've got a full-time job as well. This is a second job to me, if you will. You've obviously worked in your life. And lots of people on YouTube have as well. And it's not like we're born to the upper classes, if you will. Like a lot of these people are who sit there and preach to us about going green or about more lockdowns and face masks, and which the majority of the public do not agree with. So the only way to really stop this, the way the media agree with everybody, is to really just switch off and don't watch them. And that's the only way they'll ever get the message.
And that's what people are doing. I mean, the non-voters are the majority. And I talked in my monologue about the sofa politics shows on ITV, BBC, Sky, and just one or two others, including the new Talk TV, Murdoch's latest venture. But nobody's watching them. They still get advertising revenue, and of course they all have a budget, a massive budget. In the case of the BBC, if you don't provide them with that budget, you go to prison. Even Stalin never thought of that one. But people are not interested. And I read a piece this week. We've got Peston as opposed to Preston. We've got the Andrew Marr show, as was, whoever's doing it now. We've got several of these shows, but they're all interviewing the same people who say the same things on every sofa, every week, on every channel. Now, none of them, for example, none would invite me on. As it happens, I now wouldn't go on because I've got a far bigger audience than them without having to go there, travel across London to be insulted. But when I would have gone on, they never brought me on. And I'm just using me as an example. They wouldn't have you on, they wouldn't have anybody on who's outside what I call the dictatorship of the prevailing orthodoxy. Dr. Johnson said, the grimmest dictatorship of them all is the dictatorship of the prevailing orthodoxy. And that's the dictatorship we're now in. How can people follow your work, Ash?
They can find me on YouTube at That Preston, Preston, journalist. And obviously all my videos are up there for anybody to watch. We don't ask for any money or anything like that. So it's obviously all completely free. There's no memberships or anything. So anybody wants to come and find me, feel free. And I hope everyone enjoys the content.
I really recommend it. Thank you, Ash, for coming on the mother of all talk shows. Much appreciated, and good luck. More power to your pen. Will Joe Biden complete his US presidential term? On Twitter, yes 27, no 73. On YouTube, yes 27, exactly the same. No 73, exactly the same. And on Telegram, yes 24, no 76. Not looking good for sleepy, senile, berserk, demented President Joe Biden, at least not here on the mother of all talk shows. Let me give you the phone numbers. Remember, it's completely free to call, whether you're in the US, Canada, Britain, Ireland, all free. Here are the phone numbers. If you're in the UK, it's 08 081 965522. That's 08 081 965522. If you're in the United States or Canada, toll free, it's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And remember, you can email the show anytime at onair@moats.tv. I'll be right back. Peter says the Afghan people have lost, George. I thought you were better than this, to be honest. Give me a call, Peter. Tell me what you mean. And Oliver says, for some reason, George was on the jihadist side when it came to Yugoslavia. And that's the reason I will never trust him. I fought against the war on Yugoslavia with all my breath and all my heart. Me and Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn and others were practically the only people in this country opposing the war on Yugoslavia, the destruction of Yugoslavia. How dare you, you imbecile? If you have any guts, you'll pick up the phone right now and call this show and justify that utter slander. Really. And Yoda says, love the show. Best entertainment and education on the airwaves.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the hour.
We need to acclimatise the public for the introduction of extraterrestrials, because, come to the conclusion at this point, if they're going to come, they are going to come soon.
Back in the late 60s and early 70s, they actually saw the saucer land in front of them or pass by in New York or go overhead.
It went in front of my eyes up and turned into what looked like a star way up in the sky.
They said the same line that you just made, and it was amazing. It is an awful waste of space if we are all that there is.
All that there is. Exactly. Have you ever seen any of these phenomena?
I have seen energy entities. One looked like a massive jellyfish. The other one looked like a massive centipede.
Well, you had me up to that point. Now I just think you're stark raving mad.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
That's hilarious. I mean, it's not that I disbelieve that there's life out there. As a matter of fact, I do believe there's life out there. It's just, I don't think it probably looks like a giant jellyfish or a giant centipede. Here's a good one from Gary Joseph on Twitter. Another load of dosh handed over to the Ukraine from Britain. £1.3 billion to fund a foreign war. Yet British families are struggling. We're paying higher tax, national insurance, food prices are sky high. Unbelievable, says Gary. And unbelievable indeed it is. John Miles on the poll says they will keep Biden as POTUS even if they have to do what was done to El Cid in the final battle. Hey, John, that's my line. Strap him to his horse for those who haven't seen the magnificent El Cid. John Miles, that was John. Stephen Barnes says Reagan completed his. Biden probably will too. And Rhonda Morris says once Republicans control in November, they should begin impeachment on both Biden and Harris for their decision-making, which has endangered Americans, thus violating their first oath of office. Not only do I agree with that, Rhonda, I actually also agree that that will happen, although I think Hunter Biden and his laptop might be the first target. Vagabond says, complete his presidential term. Joe can't even complete a sentence. And Soulful Ali says, POTUS is much easier to handle and manipulate than any other POTUS of the recent past. Hence, he will survive a full term. Yeah, but I mean, what if he comes out on the stage one day and goes, blah, 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 or his trousers fall down? You know, I'm not actually inventing that. That's a very real possibility, as His Holiness the Pope almost found out in the Vatican. So get voting. Will Joe Biden complete his US presidential term? A, yes. B, no. Lots and lots of these coming in. Tony says, Russia is annihilating Ukrainian troops while Zelensky parades himself on TV. Russia has systematically destroyed Ukrainian military infrastructure. Fuel is also a huge problem for the Ukrainian military. The pro-Ukrainian propaganda networks are in full retreat. Well, I wish that was true. And Maxwell Kim says the old man needs a rest from politics, especially with his amnesia. He's just being used as a platform by people with vested interests because they know he cannot be prosecuted for anything with his current state of mind. You're right, he could just plead insanity. Look, I'm much younger than Joe Biden, but if I ever began, I suppose one day I must, that rate of mental decline, I am certain that my good wife and my children would pull me off the stage. They'd make sure that I never went in front of a television camera ever again. Here's a new caller from Florida. It's Mike. Go ahead, Mike. How is it in Florida today?
Hey, George. It's great.
Good to hear from you. Yeah, it's always great. It's always great, a sunny day. It's not bad here, actually. It was 20 here, in the south of the country, at least. 20 centigrade, that is. You'd need to double that and then add 27 to make it American. Go ahead, Mike.
Hi. My question is, what do you think is the near future for Ukraine, like in the next month or two? And
in the next month, Mike, I think the country will be bifurcated. It will be partitioned, quite possibly along the river Dnieper, but including the great city of Dnipro on the Russian side of that border. That will effectively, and I also think that the Russian forces will link up with Transnistria, because otherwise that territory, which is a Russian-speaking territory and which contains thousands of Russian peacekeepers, would be dangerously vulnerable to NATO attack, either from the Western Ukrainian forces or from Romanian forces, who've refused. It should be admitted now. So it will leave the Western Ukrainian state landlocked, with no access to the sea. It will leave them with virtually none of the enormously fertile Ukrainian agricultural sector, none virtually of the productive industries, old-fashioned though they are, but I'm sure that those industries will receive heavy investment from Russia to bring them up to the standard of Russian industry. So it'll be a burden on the EU and on NATO forever. Good luck, EU citizens. Thank God we're out of that. What do you think, Mike?
Well, I was also wondering if Poland is planning on annexing part of Western Ukraine with Lvov.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke about that last week. I don't think they'll annex it. I think that in PR terms, that would be very difficult to pull off. But I definitely think they will occupy it. And Russia has said that they have no objection to that for obvious geopolitical reasons. Poland regards that part of the west of Ukraine to be its own territory. And in the past, as you probably know, it was populated by Polish people, a very large number of whom were genocidally annihilated in the Eastern Holocaust. And a very large number of them were Polish Jews. But Lvov was a Polish city of great note, a kind of pearl of the Polish territories. So, yeah, I think you'll find that Poland will be more and more influential. I think the Hungarians will want to be influential amongst the Hungarian population in Ukraine. They're called Carpathian Hungarian people. And I think that the Romanians will have something to say about the future of Moldova and of Transnistria. So I don't think I think I'll be being pulled off the stage because I've gone gaga like Joe while this is still going on. I don't think this is going to end anytime soon. Thanks very much, Mike, and don't be a stranger. It's good to get new callers always, especially from the great state of Florida. Now, my next guest is WyattReed. He's an anti-imperialist journalist covering Latin America, and he reports on the ground from Venezuela, Mexico, Nicaragua, Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, and across the United States. He's also absolutely brilliant. If you're already following him, you already know that. Wyatt, thanks for joining us. With that kind of purview, you're not going to run out of work to do. Let me start with the Americas. The United States has convened a conference of the Americas, but it has arrogated to itself the right to exclude various American countries. Where's that at?
Absolutely. You're talking about the Summit of the Americas that is scheduled to take place next month in Los Angeles. What we're talking about here is the exclusion, as you mentioned, of Venezuela, of Nicaragua, of Cuba. The State Department has indicated that is probable. Currently, I kind of see this as something that's up in the air. I kind of, to be frank, I see some potential political maneuvering behind the scenes regarding these sort of talks that we saw open up after the beginning of the special military operations in Ukraine. When we see the U.S. looking out towards Venezuela for potential oil production after having obviously sanctioned it from the market for many, many years, having helped destroy the Venezuelan economy. Now, all of a sudden, they want Venezuela's oil again. So they haven't completely shut off the possibility of Venezuela attending. They say that that is a decision for the White House to make, not Latin America. You know, we're still in this Monroe Doctrine kind of philosophy. So, you know, we'll see how that pans out, but I am not terribly optimistic about the attendance of these leftist governments that Washington has effectively decided that it's going to try to overthrow.
As more and more of these governments become vaguely, at least, leftist, it's going to be difficult for the United States to exclude everybody who's vaguely leftist. Something I'm always puzzled about. Barack Obama didn't just change America's policy towards Cuba, he went to Cuba, met the Castros. Joe Biden was his vice president. So his current stance against Cuba is a slap in the face for his own incumbency, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's a total betrayal of his campaign promise to restore relations with Cuba, right? That was something that he campaigned on. But apparently sort of this issue of electoral politics, Florida, has basically rendered any leftward movement on Latin America effectively impossible in terms of, at least in terms of Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, right? But you're making a great point. And, you know, just today, I think Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador should be touching down in Havana to meet with Cuban president. And this is part of sort of a goodwill tour of the region, and also something that's probably organized around migration issues. But AMLO has been central towards this new kind of regional integration movement that we're seeing in Latin America. Just a few days ago, last week, the Mexican government announced the nationalization of their lithium deposits. And just a few days later, President AMLO described sort of a consortium that they are looking into alongside the governments of Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia, this lithium triangle. You know, Bolivia has about a quarter of the world's lithium deposits. Between Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, they have around 56% of the world's global supply of lithium. So they're going to be exchanging practices for lithium production. And long term, this is kind of, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but these are the kinds of relationships that are going to need to be formed if the people of Latin America really want to take their own destiny into their own hands and create some kind of OPEC for lithium. We're talking about the what oil was for the 20th century. For the 21st century, that's lithium.
Now, not only that, but Lula, who's currently 20 points ahead of the current president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, and is therefore highly likely, if nothing happens to him in the run-up to the polls, to be the next president of the mighty power of Brazil. He's talking about a new Latin American currency.
Yeah, this is, again, something that really has only become possible over the course of the last decade, right? We saw these attempts at regional integration under Venezuela throughout the 2000s. Latin America just didn't have the economic clout at the time to really be able to pull it off. Now we're seeing sort of a slow, much more measured, and definitely a bit more conservative efforts, but they're all going towards the same direction. And even Brazil, even under Bolsonaro, they're not willing to get dragged into this, Russia versus the West proxy war. They know that the main consequences economically of this kind of conflict are going to fall on the poorest countries in the world. Certainly, they've already fallen on the poorest countries in Europe. But the increase in prices for fertilizer, prices for fuel, aluminum, those are going to fall hardest on countries like Brazil. So even outside of the frame of the left coming back, we're talking about a movement continent-wide that's really irreversible at this point. And that's why you see the United States kind of trying to play catch-up. But as you see, they're still stuck in these kind of Cold War mentalities, with us or against us. We're not going to let Cuba come like it's, 1960s, the UN. It's really kind of depressing for people here in this continent. But, it really only makes it that much more certain that this sort of new multipolar world order that is constructed will stick.
Amen. Let's hope it's irreversible. WyattReed, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Now, coming up in the next hour, we've only got Professor SirJohnCurtice live on the show with his analysis of the local elections in Britain. But first, it's the news with Elliot King. But let me give you the poll recap. Will Joe Biden complete his US presidential term? A, yes, 28, going up. No72, that's on Twitter. On YouTube, Yes27, No73. On Telegram, Yes25, No75. Not looking good for you, Sleepy Joe. Well, look, I've kept him waiting long enough. It's the one and only Elliot King with the news.
Britain's Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has accused opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer of hypocrisy after police launched an investigation into whether he breached COVID-19 rules in 2021. Raab stopped short of calling for the Labour leader to quit over what he called rank double standards, but he has said Starmer had a bunch of questions to answer about the event. Labour's Lisa Nandy said the gathering at a Labour MP's office was a work event and it was absurd to compare it to Boris Johnson's serial partying. When the Metropolitan Police launched an investigation into COVID rule breaking in number 10 in January, Starmer said the PM should quit, but the Labour leader has now ruled out resigning himself. Asked if Starmer should resign, Nandy said the two situations were not the same, pointing out that Downing Street was under investigation for 12 separate gatherings. She argued that to compare that with a work meeting where people stopped to eat was pretty desperate, and accused the Conservatives and their cheerleaders in the media of flinging mud. Raab has also said that nothing is off the table in the UK's attempt to fix the Northern Ireland Protocol. He said the protocol was an obstacle to stability in the country. He was speaking after Sinn Féin secured the most seats in the Assembly election, a first for a nationalist party in Northern Ireland. The protocol, agreed between the UK and the EU, is a post-Brexit deal aimed at preventing a hard border in Ireland. It keeps Northern Ireland inside the EU's single market for goods, but it also creates a new trade border with the rest of the UK. The Democratic Unionist Party, who are opposed to the protocol, argue that it undermines Northern Ireland's place in the Union and say they will not allow the formation of a government in Northern Ireland unless there are changes to the deal. The US, UK and Irish governments have urged political parties in Northern Ireland to re-establish a devolved administration. Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill is in line to become First Minister if the DUP nominate a Deputy First Minister. However, Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis has played down the prospect of a border poll being called. He said the election results were significant, but pointed out the Unionists still have more seats than Nationalists at the Northern Ireland Assembly. The budget airline EasyJet plans to remove seats on some of its planes this summer so that it can operate flights with fewer cabin crew. The airline is battling staff shortages as it attempts to return to pre-pandemic levels of service. By taking out the back row of seating on its A319 fleet, EasyJet said it will be able to fly with 3 cabin crew instead of 4. That would limit numbers on board to a maximum of 150 passengers. Flights would still meet Civil Aviation Authority regulations on the required number of cabin crew, which is based on the number of physical seats rather than passengers on board. 2 Palestinians suspected of killing 3 Israelis in an axe and knife attack on Thursday have been arrested, police in Israel say. A massive manhunt was launched in the wake of the violence in the mainly ultra-Orthodox Jewish town of Elad. The assailants struck in a park where families had gathered to celebrate Independence Day and on a main street. 7 others were wounded, 2 seriously, in the attack. The 2 suspects were found in a bush near Elad. The Israeli authorities said they came from the district of Jenin in the northern West Bank. 17 Israelis and 2 Ukrainians had been killed in the attacks in Israel and the West Bank since March 21st. At least 26 Palestinians have been killed in Israel raids and confrontations since then. Tensions has risen recently over the Flashpoint holy site in Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. More human remains are reported to have been found at drought-hit Lake Mead near Las Vegas, a week after a body in a barrel was discovered, which police believe may be linked to the mafia. Park rangers received the report from human skeletal remains had been found on Saturday at the reservoir, which is facing record low water levels. It comes a week after a barrel containing the body of a man who had been shot was revealed on a newly exposed section of Lake Mead. Police said the killing was thought to have happened between the mid-1970s and the early 1980s because the victim was wearing shoes manufactured during the period. Investigators are considering whether the death may have been mafia-related. 60 people are feared dead under rubble after a bomb hit a school in eastern Ukraine. About 90 people were sheltering in the building when the bomb struck, causing a fire to engulf it on Saturday, the governor of the Luhansk region has said. 2 people have been confirmed dead and 60 others are likely to have died under the rubble, Serhei Gadida wrote on the Telegram messaging app. 30 people have been rescued, 7 of whom were injured, he added. And finally, Fargois, the French culinary jewel that is as tasty as it is controversial, is a staple of upscale restaurants across the country. But now it's vanishing from menus during an unprecedented crisis that has seen some manufacturers begin to consider reducing portions. At the heart of the problem is a bird flu epidemic that has been sweeping across the country and Europe for months. It's already devastated the country's poultry industry, but now it threatens one of the country's Michelin-starred restaurants. As regular deliveries of the luxurious goose liver pate have dried up, down to around half of normal, chefs have been scheduling emergency meetings with local producers. Fargois is no stranger to the crisis. Its traditional production, involving the force feeding of geese and ducks, has long attracted condemnation from animal rights campaigners who had succeeded in getting such methods banned elsewhere. While French appetites for the delicacy have been largely undermined by concerns, another threat to avian welfare is now curbing consumption. The country has had to kill 16 million poultry since the epidemic first started in November 2021 to try to control the disease, the French agricultural minister confirmed. That's all your news. I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Well, the local election results just got worse for Labour. They have the splendid net gain of just 22 councillors, up against a government in tatters, where gas prices have risen by 55%. Where petrol prices are going through the roof and we're headed inexorably to £10 a gallon, in the middle of a very controversial war, and with the Prime Minister on the rack for months over his many failures and inadequacies. Labour captured a net 22 councillors in the entire country of England. And in London, which they then fell back on as their big prize, they have a net gain of 0. They won 3 and they lost 3. No wonder Keir Starmer has just cancelled all of his engagements for tomorrow. Watch this space. Starmer may well be out. Let's go to Toronto. Why wouldn't you? Great city, where Alex wants to talk about Joe Biden. Go ahead, Alex.
Hello.
Yes, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that one of the problems I always have are people wondering if Joe Biden is replaced, things are going to improve, or if Trump comes back to power. But I'm under the feeling that the entire federal government in the U.S. has been co-opted by corporate America. In other words, it's treated like a corporate boardroom. If somebody's replaced, just like in a corporation, they follow the exact same policies. I don't think the Americans have any control over their government. And because it's a two-party system and they're both co-opted, the only way we can have an end to the war in the Ukraine is that we get rid of both political parties. And I just don't see that happening in the U.S.
Well, good luck with that. Of course, it's true that it's a seamless garment between Democrat and Republican. They are even worse than here, two cheeks of the same backside. That's true. But you can have a half-competent leader, or you can have a leader who is demented, literally demented, and who could do anything, say anything, make any matter worse. Or you might have a president that's more diplomatic. Alex, I watched a Netflix documentary this week. I'm not finished it yet, called Bobby Kennedy for President. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a magnificent documentary. Now, if Jack Kennedy hadn't been in the White House, we might not be talking now. It was his sagacity and refusal to be stampeded, even by his own cabinet, and certainly by the chiefs of staff, into a nuclear war with the Soviet Union over the Cuban Missile Crisis. When two black students were ordered by the courts to be allowed to enter the University of Alabama, and the racist fink George Wallace, the then governor, stood in the doorway of the university to stop these two black students from going in, it was the determination of Jack and Bobby Kennedy that the state must be mobilized in order to carry out the court's decision. He even federalized the National Guard in Alabama, if you can imagine how that went down, so that if necessary, they would pick George Wallace up and move him out of the doorway. You can have that president, or you can have one that would have capitulated to George Wallace. So there are margins, including in the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis, extremely important margins, where who your president is does make a difference. Don't you see?
I agree with that, but I think that the U.S. learned from, or corporate America learned from those mistakes, and it's a lot more difficult to have a Jack Kennedy type of president these days. These days, they thoroughly vet them before anybody gets the chance to rise in political circles. If the Democrats or Republicans think that you're not going to follow that strict narrative, you simply are disqualified. You can no longer participate in electoral politics in the U.S.
Very powerful case you've made, Alex. Thanks. Don't be a stranger. Come back and make another on subsequent weeks. Angelia is in Florida, twice to Florida in one day. On you go, Angelia.
Hi, George. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How very nice to hear you.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm under the impression, everything is kind of geopolitically related as far as, shutting down dissenting voices and anyone that has critical thinking, including my friend Julian Assange. And that doesn't just go with people. It goes with countries that want to, be dissidents of the vassal United States and NATO. And I think that from the beginning that, Obama has been kind of a little, I think he's kind of a puppet master here of Biden a little bit. He's the one that started prosecuting the whistleblowers and actually started, he tortured Chelsea Manning. He's torturing, that torture continues with Julian today. One of the things I wanted to bring up, George, that maybe your audience doesn't know, but Nils Melzer, the special rapporteur for torture, he actually released in a podcast that he did with, the name's not coming to me. I'll think of it in a minute, that Julian's own legal team asked him to play down the torture. that he found, him and his colleagues found when he went in and evaluated Julian. And I find this so scary because that was their entire defense. Their entire defense was the fact that Julian has been targeted and tortured. So it made no sense to me that his own legal staff would ask him to do that.
And threatened with murder, of course. And threatened with murder.
I just feel like all these people surrounding Julian are actors. And it scares me. I met Julian in 2015 because I had nowhere else to go. What, was I going to go to my government? You know, the police here in America, there was nowhere for me to go. And I started researching and came across this guy who had no sunlight, and I couldn't imagine why anyone didn't care, you know, at the time. So I actually flew off to London to go see what was happening. And that was March 2019, actually the 27th, is when they shut down all Julian's communications. I was sitting right across from him at the deli, across from the embassy, and that's when we haven't heard Julian's voice since. Meaning, why isn't his attorneys letting him talk or getting his voice out? It's like they're all shutting him up.
I don't think he.
It doesn't make any sense.
No, I don't speak for his lawyers. I've never met them. They've never spoken to me, and that goes for the whole campaign. By the way, none of the leaders of his campaign have ever spoken to me. I just do what I can for Julian because I love him and because I value and treasure him. But no one ever consulted me or asked me to speak or any of that. So I can't speak for the lawyers. But in their defense, let me say this. In this country, it would not be possible to record Julian and take the recording out of the prison. That's simply not permissible. There are countries where it happens, and it has happened in this country with special dispensation before. A TV news crew was allowed into the very prison that Julian is in, Belmarsh, to interview a little street hooligan, Tommy Robinson, a far-right figure. He was filmed in Belmarsh prison, but I'm certain that they would never give that permission for Julian to be heard. Thanks for calling us, and from sunny Florida with such a sunny voice, and I hope if I'm ever in Belmarsh, you'll fly over to see me in London. Professor SirJohnCurtice is now on the line. Professor, thanks very much for joining us. My latest figures are these. Labour has a net gain in England of 22 councillors. In London, which once it became clear that the red wall had not fallen to them, they started to sing the song that, look how well we've done in London, but they now have a net gain of 0 in the capital. They won 3 boroughs and they lost 3 boroughs. They won the 3 of the richest boroughs and lost 3 of the poorest boroughs, including 2 directly elected mayors. Do you think that might be the reason why Keir Starmer just cancelled all his engagements tomorrow? Is there something happening? Some tectonic plates shifting, do you think?
Oh, I think the reason presumably why Sir Keir Starmer has cancelled his engagements tomorrow is because of the intricacies of what we now come to know as Beergate, i.e. the fact that he's now being investigated by Durham police for allegations that he might have broken the lockdown rules before the Hartlepool by-election. And that, of course, is extremely embarrassing for him, given that how strongly he's pursued the Prime Minister on the issue. But, I mean, if we come back to Labour's performance in the elections, you're quite right about London. Initially, it looked as though Labour was doing better in London than elsewhere. On the sample of boroughs that I have, I've got about 10 a dozen of the detailed voting figures. Actually, Labour's votes slightly down in London as compared with 2018 when the seats were last fought, and that actually is pretty typical across England as a whole. And I mean, the narrative that the Labour Party itself has argued, and I suppose, not unreasonable, but it's certainly selective, is to say, well, we've done a lot, we've done better than we did in the 2019 general election, which of course was a bit of a disaster. We've done better than we did in the local elections last year, which was also pretty much of a disaster. So look, we are making progress. But the problem is, of course, is that what Sir Keir is wanting to demonstrate is that he can take his party to heights that his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, couldn't achieve. And basically not doing any better than was done in 2018 when Labour was led by Jeremy Corbyn, and which happened to be Labour's best electoral performance in local elections under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, does therefore mean that the claim that progress is being made on the record of the predecessor is still not clearly sustained. At best, you can argue it was kind of almost as good. So that's, in a sense, the big takeaway. And, the gains, such gains as Labour have made in councils and seats, both within and outside of London, are effectively a reflection of the fact that the Conservatives definitely are down from where they were 4 years ago. They're 4 or 5 points down. And if your opponents go down and you sit still, then you're going to pick up some seats, even though you haven't yourselves made much in the way of progress. Of course, the other embarrassment in the end for the Labour Party was that there was another party that did make some progress, and in the end made rather more gains, and that was the Liberal Democrats. And that, of course, was the one thing that nobody was really expecting.
No, quite. So the Keir Starmer Labour Party, whose raison d'etre, defined by themselves, was to leave Corbynism behind, has actually done slightly less well, from what you've said, than they did under Corbyn, which is a slightly surprising outcome, certainly perverse. Go on.
Well, they did slightly less well than Jeremy Corbyn's best outcome. They certainly did better than Corbyn in 2016, 2017 and 2019. It's just that 2018 is the high point. But if you're going to unambiguously claim to be doing better than your predecessor, then in a sense, you need to be able to get over the highest hurdle. And then Labour didn't, Labour in their performance last Thursday didn't quite get over the highest hurdle.
Quite so. The low-hanging fruit of this Tory government, with its high taxes, national insurance hikes, big increases in the cost of living, the behaviour of the Prime Minister, his personal conduct, the poor odour in which he is widely held, even inside his own party. He's not out the woods yet, is he, in terms of a challenge to his leadership? If you can't pluck that kind of low-hanging fruit, then you'd have to say that Sir Keir Starmer is not currently looking like the next Prime Minister.
Well, you're certainly right that, the reason why I guess there's been a degree of excitement, if that's the right word, about the political situation over the last 2 or 3 months is that it has been the first time, and it's now been confirmed by these local elections, it's the first time that the Labour Party has been ahead of the Conservative Party in the polls. We had 2 years of the Conservative Party at least being even, Stevens, and usually being ahead. And I suppose, therefore, given that certainly the opposition, and inevitably many a journalist, have been looking for the chink in the armour of apparent Conservative invincibility, that has been evident in recent years. And indeed, if you take the Conservatives' performance in these local elections, with the exception of 2019, when the local elections took place, when Theresa May was struggling to get her Brexit agreement through her party and through the House of Commons, and indeed was only to resign a few weeks later. Apart from that, this is actually the worst Conservative performance in the local elections since before the EU referendum. So it's also an indicating that the delivery of Brexit doesn't necessarily guarantee Conservative electoral success. But certainly, the estimate that we put out was that the Labour Party is about 5 points ahead of the Conservatives in the local ballot boxes. If everybody had the chance to vote, the opinion polls say it's 6. If you go back to the days of either when David Cameron was leader of the opposition or Tony Blair, then in those instances, both of them recorded much, much bigger leads over the opposition before eventually going on to win a general election in 2010 and 1997, respectively. Now, that said, however, we can't necessarily jump from that to say that Sir Keir Starmer doesn't have any chance of becoming Prime Minister. Because the other thing we have to bear in mind is that the Conservative Party doesn't have any friends inside the House of Commons. At the moment, you know, both the result on Thursday and the opinion polls are essentially pointing to a hung parliament, and a hung parliament in which the Conservatives would not be anything like close to 326. Given that it looks as though none of the other parties in the House of Commons will be willing to help to sustain a Conservative minority administration, including the DUP, the hurdle that the Conservatives have to get past, they have to get a majority. If they fail, they're probably out on their ear, you know, that probably means having to be about 3 or 4 points ahead, which they're not at the moment. Now, of course, what is then true if we get a hung parliament, Sir Keir will be faced with the task of having to bargain and strike a deal with one or more opposition parties. Doubtless his preferred party would be the Liberal Democrats, but their price would probably be doing something pretty significant on proportional representation. But even they may not have the numbers. Indeed, on Thursday's vote, kind of nip and tuck whether they would. The alternative, of course, is the SNP, and the price of the SNP would be some kind of referendum on constitutional change in Scotland, in which independence is at least one of the options on the ballot paper. Now, these are both pretty tough choices with potential long-term implications, not only for the Labour Party, but also for British politics in general. But at the end of the day, one has to understand the realpolitik here. History suggests that when leaders of the opposition are faced with the choice between becoming the next Prime Minister or losing the leadership of their party, they tend to be willing to strike the deal that enables them to become Prime Minister. And I would cite as a very clear example of that, David Cameron in 2010, who 2 days before polling day said, absolute disaster if it's a hung parliament. There would be chaos, etc., etc. What was happening? Well, actually, privately, Oliver Letwin, his policy guru, was reading the Liberal Democrat manifesto in fine deal, and the Conservatives were all ready to negotiate with the Liberal Democrats what was in the end was a coalition deal. So don't necessarily accept the rhetorical claims that are made before an election. When realpolitik clicks in, then we will discover that some of those promises won't necessarily hold a great deal of water.
But let's imagine I'm the Prime Minister and you're my advisor. You'd be saying to me, you have to fight this as a choice between stable government and a coalition of chaos. Every rag bag of opposition party all fighting inside a big marquee. Nothing would be solid, nothing would be certain. Even the continued existence of the country as a state would be at risk. And that would be a powerful electoral plea, wouldn't it? Because you've just said that's the alternative to another Tory government.
Well, that's your characterisation of the alternative, George. My answer to you is that was precisely the message from David Cameron in 2010, when, of course, during the election campaign, there had been a dramatic rise in Liberal Democrat support, much of which disappeared by polling day, but, you know, it dominated the campaign. It didn't get him an overall majority. Now, Conservative politicians certainly believe that the campaign they fought in 2015, in which they portrayed Ed Miliband as being in Alex Salmond's and then Nicola Sturgeon's pocket, was effective and enabled them to win the 2015 general election with an overall majority, somewhat to people's surprise. I would, however, make two observations about that. The first is that I think the reason why that campaign, in a sense, had legs, but why also it probably didn't have that much impact, is that it was feeding a an image and an impression of Ed Miliband that the electorate already had. That is that he was relatively weak. I'm not sure that the same trick would work with Keir Starmer. So Keir may not be charismatic, but nobody really thinks of him as being particularly weak. And in any event, I mean, there isn't an awful lot of real hard data on this, but certainly what I can say to you is that it was already the case, even before the 2015 election was fought, that around half the public thought that the Labour Party would be willing to do a deal with the SNP if they needed to do so. So actually, again, this was already quite heavily baked in. That proportion did go up 10 points during the election campaign. But if you then actually look at the switching, or rather the non-switching of the people who, before the election campaign, didn't think that Labour would do a deal with the SNP, but by the end thought they did these people swing to the Conservatives? Well, the answer is no. So, I mean, I think, you know, one of the problems with elections is that the victors will always claim that their campaign was effective because, of course, they won. Actually, the reason why they won doesn't necessarily lie in the campaign they fought. And it's not clear to me that the Conservative explanation as to why they won in 2015 is correct. The other thing, by the way, to bear in mind is that actually a plurality, at least, of Labour supporters in England think that Scotland should have a referendum. So it's not entirely clear that, you know, how far this is actually something that would put off potential voters to the Labour Party even south of the border.
Now, Sir John, you're in Scotland. I'm also in Scotland. We'll come to that last. But penultimately, the red wall did not turn red again. I mean, I saw a result from Walsall just before I came in the studio. A massive 15% drop in the Labour vote in Walsall, in the West Midlands, former Labour heartland. Industrial Britain, the heart of industrial Britain, or was. The Tories won a seat from Labour, with the Labour vote falling 15%. And you'll have far more knowledge and examples of that. To what do you attribute the failure of Labour to capture at least some of its red wall?
Right, well, it's a little bit more complicated than people appreciate. By the way, to Walsall, I would add Newcastle under Lyme. That's one the Labour Party should have denied the Conservatives overall control and failed to do so. However, it is a bit more complicated. If you actually, it's certainly true that if you compare what happened in the most Leave parts of the country with the most pro-Remain parts, despite what we said earlier about London, which of course is the most pro-Remain part of the country, there is no doubt that as compared with 2018, insofar as Labour did lose ground, they were more likely to lose it in Leave areas, and that was particularly true of the north of England. So that much is true. However, if you compare the results this year with those last year, which you can do outside of London, actually Labour did make more progress as compared with last year in Leave voting areas than in Remain voting areas, okay? So there are signs of Labour making some progress with a capital S in Leave voting areas. The problem is that the amount that Labour has lost since 2016 in Leave voting areas as compared with Remain voting areas is so substantial that, you know, what was a little bit of improvement in 2022 just isn't enough to reverse it. And it does therefore mean that, given that we're still focusing on the comparison with 4 years ago, it wasn't even enough to reverse the movement caused by Brexit as compared with 4 years ago. And the truth is, Brexit's left an enormous legacy on the electoral geography of Britain. It's particularly had a legacy on the Conservatives to a lesser degree, but it's still there on Labour. And it's going to take quite a long time probably for the Labour Party to begin to reverse it. But of course, what you should bear in mind is that, you know, next year's local elections, 2019, will be the baseline. By that stage, a lot of Brexit will be baked in. And then the general election, you know, the impact of Brexit is its height. So you'll begin to find, I think, even if Labour isn't always making that much progress, that increasingly we will find that Labour are at least recouping some of the lost ground, but recouping all of it, that's going to be pretty difficult.
But you don't think that they could make more progress with, just to use your word, a more charismatic leader, an Andy Burnham maybe?
Well, Andy Burnham might be one possibility, but then you do have to remember that Mr. Burnham did stand in the leadership election in 2015 and was one of 3 candidates who was unable to persuade Labour Party membership that he would be any more effective than Jeremy Corbyn. If you were to actually get me to guess, well, who might be the dark horse this time? I mean, Andy Burnham is not in the House of Commons, so if Beergate causes Sir Keir Starmer to resign, he's not going to be available. The person who is undoubtedly making a favourable impression is Wes Streeting, who is proving to be an extremely adept opposition spokesman. Now, again, not that experienced, and obviously one question mark would be, would he end up being a flash in the pan in the way that Rishi Sunak appeared to be? Because Rishi Sunak was also extremely articulate, but then has imploded over his wife's non-dom status and the spring statement and all the rest of it. So Mr. Streeting certainly has got a few more spurs to earn, but he is certainly somebody who's beginning, somebody who does, I think, potentially can make the kind of impact on the electorate that would make people sit up and take a listen. But he isn't going to take the party to the left, George. He's very clearly, firmly.
In fact, he's off to.
He does have the personal qualities that are needed.
He's off to Israel in the morning, so maybe he's already off and running. Finally, the Daily Record, for our international audience, will describe it as well, once upon a time, a mass market tabloid in Scotland, small market now, but still influential, has a poll out tonight that shows just 23% of the people polled wanting an independence referendum in 2023. Find symmetry that. And that's the policy of the Scottish Nationalist Party, which campaigns for independence. Are we in for an early referendum, and how could one come about?
We are in for an attempt to hold an early referendum, because I think the SNP will want either to have tried and succeeded, or to have tried and failed, but either way they will regard it in their interest to try. If they manage to succeed, all well and good from their point of view, although of course it's an extremely risky project because Scotland is divided 50-50 on the question as to which way it would vote. But trying and failing is also fine, because that would set it up how it would campaign in the UK general election, which is coming down the track by the end of 2024. Not that I think that the SNP, so far as the electorate is concerned, is necessarily under that much pressure to hold it by the end of 2023. Basically, the message of polls has been for some time, and I think it's true of the poll that you're citing, is that people who voted yes don't necessarily feel the referendum has to be within the next 12 months. They just simply think it needs to happen before 2026, i.e. before the end of the SNP's parliamentary term. So actually, yes, voters, many of them are quite patient. But this takes us back to the earlier part of our conversation. Sure, the current UK government is certainly not minded to acquiesce, although whether or not the legal position is quite as clear as they believe is another, potentially long debate. It might depend on the question that the SNP put on the ballot paper. But if indeed the Conservatives lose their majority at the next election, and if the SNP have the bargaining power, then that's the moment at which the SNP will be wanting to use the power it would have at Westminster in order to try and basically force a referendum. And my own view is that if the Labour Party tries to form a minority administration without the support of the SNP, and it doesn't otherwise have the votes, that the SNP will be willing to gum up the votes at Westminster and may well be willing to bring that Labour administration down. So,
well, they've done that before. They've done that before.
To which the SNP will play hardball.
I said lastly, but one quick one. It's only fair for me to mention that Labour in Scotland did better than Labour in England, has now overtaken the Conservatives as the second party in the country. To what do you attribute that?
Oh, I don't think it's necessarily true, George, that the Labour Party did better in Scotland than they did in England, because it's a different baseline. In Scotland, the last election was in 2017, and Labour didn't do as well in England in 2017 as they did in 2018. The rise in Labour's vote, 2 points, on the back of what frankly was a disaster in 2017, the party falling into third place with just 20% of the vote. And the principal reason why the Labour Party is second is actually because of the sharp decline of the Conservative vote from what was a very high baseline. The Conservatives were having to defend their best local election results since 1982, but it's basically Conservative down 6, Labour up 2. So a 2-point lead over the Conservatives is essentially the product of the Conservative decline. And if you compare the progress that Labour made with the modest progress the SNP made in these local elections, they're both up by just over 1.5 points. So the gap between the SNP and the Labour Party is exactly the same as it was in 2017. And of course, if Labour is going to win much in the way of parliamentary seats north of the border, it's not the Conservatives they have to catch up on, it's the SNP. And there isn't any evidence in these local elections that the Labour Party has made any progress in that endeavour.
Although in our city of Glasgow, they came within a hair's breadth of recapturing.
Yeah, sure, but that's essentially because the SNP were losing votes to the Greens, who of course are also part of the pro-independent side.
Sir John Curtice, Professor, thank you very much indeed for your peerless advice on the outcome of Thursday's local elections. I'm overdue for a break, don't you think? I'll be right back.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary MacLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis, look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
That voice is so like Donald Trump, and that is exactly the kind of thing he'd say. Lots of response to Sir John Curtice's interview there. Let's go to the lines. Vaz is in Devon, in the southwest of England. Vaz, go ahead, please.
Hi, George. It's nice to talk to you again.
And you, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, the whole world can. Go ahead.
Okay, hello, world. Right. The elections that we've had in this country, we were sat here with my partner, listening to what you've been saying, and my beautiful partner has been going off the rails as to the fact that the elections in this country are basically happening with a generation of people, no disrespect, who are engaged within the political process. So there are people of a certain generation who will vote red or blue, regardless of who's wearing those colours. And there are then the people of the middle age, people like myself and my partner, who will vote for a certain political party, depending on whether we feel that that party will actually do the things that we require them to do for us in order for them to make our life better. Whether they deliver on those promises is a different story. But there is a whole generation of people in this country who are completely not engaged in the political process. And those are the people between the ages of 18 to, I would say, 25, 28 years old. And these people have, the majority of them, absolutely no interest in politics whatsoever. But
Well,
unfortunately,
actually, tell your missus we have no disagreement about that at all. Hello, good evening, ma'am. I hope I didn't cause any discord in the house. That's never my intention. And we have no disagreement on that point. I just make this point as an older man. When I first became involved in politics, 80% of the people in the country voted either red or blue. Now it is far fewer than 50%. So new parties have sprung up and new forces have emerged. I hope more of them will, despite the ossification caused by our political voting system. But it's true, absolutely, that the average 18-year-old and the average 25-year-old, if that is your two parameters, are not engaged. They don't watch mainstream television. They don't read mainstream newspapers. Even my own children, when I was their age, my eldest son will be 15 in a few days. When I was his age, I was already an office bearer in the Labour Party. I was already a political activist, already imagining that I would have a political life and as a representative. I cannot get my own 15-year-old son to watch his father on television because I'm talking about things in which at present, I'm sorry to say, he has absolutely no interest in. Over to you.
George. Okay, Ali, carry on.
Okay, I wasn't
going to talk.
Welcome.
All
You're more
I
than
wanted
welcome.
to say, I just think if we could appeal to that age, my son is 21 and he's very interested in everything. I've kind of taught him, wrongly I guess you could say, not to vote for anybody because there's nobody worth voting for. But if there was somebody worth voting for, and if we could appeal to the younger people, that's all I think we need to do, then I think we could make changes.
Well, thank you both very much. It's not often we get a husband and wife team on the show, and I'm very glad that we did. A good evening to both of you. Let's go to the Kingdom of Fife. It's not really a kingdom anymore, but that's what we refer to it as, where Ray is on the line. He thinks council elections don't matter. How so, Ray?
Hello, George. Evening.
Evening.
My view is that at the moment, I don't think there's really many competent people in politics actually worth voting for. They're all, in my view, kind of incompetent in one way or another. There's nothing standing out where, you'd actually want to vote for them. It's much the same in the States with, Biden. Your choices are really limited. And my concern is that the UK at the moment is collapsing. It's like a slow motion car crash where we've got huge issues coming with regards to food, energy, the NHS waiting lists, huge, massive problems coming. And I don't believe there's anybody at the moment in politics that's got a handle on this or even possibly capable of dealing with the issues that are coming.
Well, that's a brilliant call, and I couldn't have put it better myself, and I absolutely 100% agree with it. And just at the moment where we are actually existentially challenged with the breakup of the country and all these other issues that you raised, plus the international tensions of the danger of war, European war, even nuclear war, we have the poorest political leaders that we have ever had, certainly in my lifetime, and we've had lots of poor leaders. So I agree with you absolutely. I was talking at a big meeting in London at noon today, and I was expressing exactly the points that you have just expressed. We are facing multiple crises, and we're facing them with a political leadership that is so underpowered, you wouldn't send many of them out for a loaf. Ray, great call of the night so far. Simon is in London. Let's hear from Simon. Go ahead, Simon.
How you doing, George? You okay?
Yeah, good, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I must apologize to you, George, because in the time of crisis and what's happening in Ukraine, that I've got to bring something as petty and stupid as this up. But I'll bring it anyway. A few weeks ago, there were allegations, as you know, that Angela Rayner has been a victim of sexism from certain members of the Tory party. And I'm not interested, I don't want to go into anyone's peccadillos, but effectively she was accused of raising her legs in the air to such an extent that certain positions of hers could be visible to Boris. Not exactly the world's most moral man, let's face it. And immediately several people came to her defense from all parties, and rightfully so. Sexism like racism that Jeremy Corbyn was falsely accused of is certainly a thing that needs to be rooted out of any society. It's true. Immediately, as I said, several people went ahead of us, tried to defend her against allegations of sexism, saying this is typical of the Tory party and that Boris should do something about this. There were waves of sympathy towards Angela Rayner, who herself said she felt like a victim. But recently, and it's been found out that all this was based on a rather crude, vulgar conversation that she herself was involved in. Now, I'm not going to criticize people for making jokes at their own expense. People at workplaces do that all the time, as I said, and it's something that they're responsible for, and they should take the responsibility for their actions. But do you realize what could have happened if this accusation went to an ordinary person at a workplace? They would have been fired. It would have been like stealing bread from someone's table. And not only that, can you just imagine how cold and callous this lady is by not admitting this in the first place and just going with this wave of sympathy?
Well, not only can I imagine it, I know it because I know her. So you don't have to teach me how cold and callous she is. And it's not a petty story at all, because it's another Labour boomerang. Just like the Curry night in Durham. You have a party which is going nuclear on the question of the Prime Minister's breaches of lockdown when they themselves were guilty, and there's no defence to this, of even more egregious, premeditated breaches of lockdown. You have a party going bananas over an allegation that the deputy leader of the Labour Party has been Sharon Stone-like, opening her legs and crossing her legs to put the Prime Minister off. And as you say, he's not the most moral of men, he's a mountebank. And you certainly wouldn't want to be doing that in front of him. And it turns out that this was a story that she told on the House of Commons terrace herself. She said that she did this. Whether it's true or isn't true, she said that she does this. It's another Labour boomerang. They're good at fashioning rods for their own backs. And I'm not as sanguine as Sir John Curtice. I believe that Keir Starmer will fall over this and over the multitude of other problems that the Labour Party has. That was a great call, Simon, a Scotsman in London. Caroline is in Cope Bridge, in my former parish, metaphorically speaking. I love it dearly. Caroline, go ahead.
Good evening, George. I feel like a stalker.
No, you're welcome, always.
Something happened the last couple of days, and I just seen comments tonight about Sinn Féin, and I'm digesting it. I want to ask you, what do you think now that Sinn Féin's replied, and of the people in the 6 counties, also known as Northern Ireland? My mum was Irish, so obviously I do have a horse in the race, right? And I was wondering what your thoughts are in the local elections in Ireland.
Well, I mean, first of all, of course, one has to acknowledge that this is the first time that Irish nationalism, for international viewers, the reunification of Ireland, people who believe in that, have come first in an election. And that is in itself significant. But becoming first happened because of the divisions inside the pro-British unionist forces, not because Sinn Féin advanced. They had 27 members of the Northern Ireland Assembly before Thursday, and they've still got 27 now. It's just that the DUP has fallen to 2 seats behind that. If you count up all the votes that were cast for unionism, as opposed to all the votes that were cast for Irish republicanism, and that would have to include a very milk and water commitment to Irish republicanism in the so-called Social Democratic and Labour Party, the SDLP. If you include them, then there's more people voted to stay in Britain than voted to leave it. However, politics, and it's kind of what I feel about my long conversation with John Curtice, Sir John, earlier. I just didn't really have time to test him on it. Politics is about perception as much as it is about the detail. You can get lost in the detail. And the perception now is that Sinn Féin have the big mo, the momentum, added to which they are easily, by a long way, the most popular political party in the south of Ireland, in the Irish Republic. And when that election comes, they will undoubtedly be in government, maybe even leading the government. So you then have a Taoiseach, Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland, and a First Minister of Northern Ireland, both from Sinn Féin, the Republican Party. The perception of that may cause some cascade, make the plates shift. Maybe a border poll will have to happen. Maybe the Chief Minister, First Minister in the North, and the Prime Minister, Taoiseach in the South will insist that it happens. And maybe that border poll will be held, and maybe the reunification of Ireland will happen. My own view, my own mother, like your mother, is Irish. My own view is that, assuming I live a decent lifespan, in my own lifetime, never mind my children's, the island of Ireland will be reunited by peaceful and democratic means. Sing hallelujah. Thank you, Caroline, for that. Can I tell you that you can't just donate, as many of you have been doing on the website. That's moats.tv, and go to the donate button and please press a recurrent donation, any currency you like. Make it one every week. Please do that for me, yeah? So I don't have to be appealing to you like this, which is demeaning for me. But you can also donate even more easily on YouTube on the Super Chat mechanism. There it is there on the screen. Give your pound. It's very easy. Look, they're, oh my goodness, these numbers are climbing. I hope they're real. But you can do it on the Super Chat, yeah? So if you're watching on YouTube, as most people now are, then please make your donation by Super Chat. We'll get it quicker than we will if you go to the website. But of course, both are acceptable and gratefully received, as indeed is still PayPal. I know a lot of people don't like PayPal, but they've been fine with us, and everybody who gave on PayPal, the money has been received by us. I can't believe that that hour has flown by. In the next hour, I've got FaranFronczak, one of my favourite American correspondents, on the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case. You might think you're not interested in that, but the people are. Anyway, first of all, it's the one and only Elliot King with the news. And keep voting on the polls. Should Sir Keir Starmer resign over hypocrisy? Vote now. 1 hour you've got.
Britain's Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has accused opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer of hypocrisy after police launched an investigation into whether he breached COVID-19 rules in 2021. Raab stopped short of calling for the Labour leader to quit over what he called rank double standards, but he has said Starmer had a bunch of questions to answer about the event. Labour's Lisa Nandy said the gathering at a Labour MP's office was a work event and it was absurd to compare it to Boris Johnson's serial partying. When the Metropolitan Police launched an investigation into COVID rule breaking in number 10 in January, Starmer said the PM should quit, but the Labour leader has now ruled out resigning himself. Asked if Starmer should resign, Nandy said the two situations were not the same, pointing out that Downing Street was under investigation for 12 separate gatherings. She argued that to compare that with a work meeting where people stopped to eat was pretty desperate, and accused the Conservatives and their cheerleaders in the media of flinging mud. Raab has also said that nothing is off the table in the UK's attempt to fix the Northern Ireland Protocol. He said the protocol was an obstacle to stability in the country. He was speaking after Sinn Féin secured the most seats in the Assembly election, a first for a nationalist party in Northern Ireland. The protocol, agreed between the UK and the EU, is a post-Brexit deal aimed at preventing a hard border in Ireland. It keeps Northern Ireland inside the EU's single market for goods, but it also creates a new trade border with the rest of the UK. The Democratic Unionist Party, who are opposed to the protocol, argue that it undermines Northern Ireland's place in the Union and say they will not allow the formation of a government in Northern Ireland unless there are changes to the deal. The US, UK and Irish governments have urged political parties in Northern Ireland to re-establish a devolved administration. Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill is in line to become First Minister if the DUP nominate a Deputy First Minister. However, Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis has played down the prospect of a border poll being called. He said the election results were significant, but pointed out the Unionists still have more seats than Nationalists at the Northern Ireland Assembly. The budget airline EasyJet plans to remove seats on some of its planes this summer so that it can operate flights with fewer cabin crew. The airline is battling staff shortages as it attempts to return to pre-pandemic levels of service. By taking out the back row of seating on its A319 fleet, EasyJet said it will be able to fly with 3 cabin crew instead of 4. That would limit numbers on board to a maximum of 150 passengers. Flights would still meet Civil Aviation Authority regulations on the required number of cabin crew, which is based on the number of physical seats rather than passengers on board. 2 Palestinians suspected of killing 3 Israelis in an axe and knife attack on Thursday have been arrested, police in Israel say. A massive manhunt was launched in the wake of the violence in the mainly ultra-Orthodox Jewish town of Elad. The assailants struck in a park where families had gathered to celebrate Independence Day and on a main street. 7 others were wounded, 2 seriously, in the attack. The 2 suspects were found in a bush near Elad. The Israeli authorities said they came from the district of Jenin in the northern West Bank. 17 Israelis and 2 Ukrainians had been killed in the attacks in Israel and the West Bank since March 21st. At least 26 Palestinians have been killed in Israel raids and confrontations since then. Tensions has risen recently over the Flashpoint holy site in Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. More human remains are reported to have been found at drought-hit Lake Mead near Las Vegas, a week after a body in a barrel was discovered, which police believe may be linked to the mafia. Park rangers received the report from human skeletal remains had been found on Saturday at the reservoir, which is facing record low water levels. It comes a week after a barrel containing the body of a man who had been shot was revealed on a newly exposed section of Lake Mead. Police said the killing was thought to have happened between the mid-1970s and the early 1980s because the victim was wearing shoes manufactured during the period. Investigators are considering whether the death may have been mafia-related. 60 people are feared dead under rubble after a bomb hit a school in eastern Ukraine. About 90 people were sheltering in the building when the bomb struck, causing a fire to engulf it on Saturday, the governor of the Luhansk region has said. 2 people have been confirmed dead and 60 others are likely to have died under the rubble, Sergei Gadida wrote on the Telegram messaging app. 30 people have been rescued, 7 of whom were injured, he added. And finally, Fargois, the French culinary jewel that is as tasty as it is controversial, is a staple of upscale restaurants across the country. But now it's vanishing from menus during an unprecedented crisis that has seen some manufacturers begin to consider reducing portions. At the heart of the problem is a bird flu epidemic that has been sweeping across the country and Europe for months. It's already devastated the country's poultry industry, but now it threatens one of the country's Michelin-starred restaurants. As regular deliveries of the luxurious goose liver pate have dried up, down to around half of normal, chefs have been scheduling emergency meetings with local producers. Fargois is no stranger to the crisis. Its traditional production, involving the force feeding of geese and ducks, has long attracted condemnation from animal rights campaigners who had succeeded in getting such methods banned elsewhere. While French appetites for the delicacy have been largely undermined by concerns, another threat to avian welfare is now curbing consumption. The country has had to kill 16 million poultry since the epidemic first started in November 2021 to try to control the disease, the French agricultural minister confirmed. That's all your news. I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Well, the Times headline tomorrow is Starmer in deep trouble as his curry defence begins to crumble. Crumble like a crisp papadum, if you'll forgive the Indian restaurant metaphor. Should Sir Keir Starmer resign over hypocrisy? Is the Pope a Catholic? A, yes, 76%. B, no, 24%. That's on Twitter. On YouTube, yes, 85%. No, 15%. And on Telegram, yes, 91%. No, 9%. Schadenfreude? Moi? Let's go to Eddie, who's on the line in Manchester. Go ahead, Eddie.
Good evening, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. What would you like to say?
It's a pleasure to speak to you once again. I just want to say it's infuriating hearing what's coming out from the Western media. I mean, nobody's asking the right question. Nobody's saying the right thing. I mean, nobody's saying, why are we throwing fuel into the fire? Why are we not looking for any other avenues rather than funneling weapons and, you know, like basically throwing more fuel into the fire? Yeah. I mean, the Western media, their double standard and their hypocrisy has no limit. I mean, I remember once they were talking about Australia's fears and security when China became a little bit friendly with the Solomon Islands. Now, the Solomon Islands is like 2,000 kilometers from Australia. Yet, Putin's fear, it's unwarranted. It's just crazy, isn't it? It's just...
It is. The double standard is becoming more extreme. There's always been double standards. Don't forget, I've been in politics since the late 1960s. So I'm here to tell you there was always lots of double standards. And it was even worse then because there was nothing called social media. Despite all the controls and shadow bans and so on, at least we have some voice. I'm talking to you now, and you are listening to me now. That's an advance, because back then in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 21st century, until the invention of social media, literally a handful of people controlled all access to all media. So there are more people know the truth today than have ever known it. But that doesn't mean we're a majority. Very, very far from it. There's a lot of sheep. And as I keep saying, it only takes one sheepdog to control and herd a very big flock of sheep. And the sheep are all the time encouraged to fear being eaten by the wolf. But in the end, they're eaten by the shepherd. So all is not lost, but neither is the situation good. Eddie, you're absolutely right. And the truth is, if you were prominently suggesting different courses of action to the state-dictated narrative, you simply wouldn't be invited back on. I mean, I'm a case in point. I would not be invited because they already know what I think. And they do not want what I think to find a wider audience amongst those small sections of the community who haven't yet switched on to the mother of all talk shows. I better read some social media. Thanks, Eddie. Lawrence says, I think the whole Labour front bench needs to resign, not just Starmer. They're all dead wood. Quite so. I'm not even sure the names of the members of the shadow cabinet. They're definitely a shadow, that's for sure. And Barkey says, who's that? I'm American. I don't know him. Big smile. He's the leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition. We talk about American politics. You've got to listen to some British politics. After all, we are two countries divided by a common language, aren't we? And William Taylor says, I voted no on the Joe Biden question, solely on the grounds his replacement will be worse than he is. And Tuferi B. Kawaja says, no need to resign, but he owes the British people a sincere and heartfelt apology. And Proud to be British says, no, he is a gift that keeps on giving for the Tories. We need him to stay. Just think about that, Labour Party members. And Captain Thunk says, either way, he is forever tarnished. He now looks like a grubby lawyer trying to get off, thanks to the whistleblower revealing that the meal took place after work and was a social event. You don't eat curry and drink beer for 1 hour, 20 minutes, unless there's a strong social element. That's the message of the night, I think. Let's go to Gloria in Southport.
Hi,
Gloria. Hi, nice to hear from you again. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
Yes, I'm like Boris. I was when I first spoke to you, the pandemic, I had my 80th birthday on the lawn in the front garden with a dear friend standing at the garden gate and my daughter at the garden gate. It wasn't like Boris's birthday. I'm awfully sorry, but I don't know why there's the news in the background. I don't know what I've done here. Anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about, is it too disconcerting for you that the news is in the background?
No.
Did you happen to watch the Parliament Select Committee session on Russian disinformation?
I didn't. Wild horses couldn't have dragged me to watch it. Tell us the highlights or the lowlights, Gloria.
Well, I'm a lady, as I said before, I'm in my 80s, so I do take an interest in everything that's going on. And it's interesting from what you said about young people, because my grandchildren don't take it all goes over their heads. They just get on with their lives. So I think it falls upon me to know exactly what's going on. And I take a keen interest in current affairs. And I watch what they call Russian disinformation. I've watched Patrick Lancaster. My favourite is Richard Medhurst. Scott
He's
Ritter.
wonderful, yeah, he's wonderful. We had him on last week. You saw that, yeah?
Oh yes, I don't miss any of your shows.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
But what amazed me were the words they used. Now I don't know who it was. There was Kevin Backhurst and Keir Giles. Now the other two women, but one of those two men, they said that people watched Russian so-called propaganda. Now, I watch everything. I watch United States propaganda. I watch the lot, and I make my own informed decision. But he said we were cretins. Cretins. That was the word he used. Lonely, sad people. I found it so offensive to use the word cretin. And I don't understand this, because if they ban everything, which is what they want to do, if they take every alternative report, we'll end up like Russia. We won't know what's going on.
Well, actually, Russia has a freer media than we now have. Imagine that. But everyone listening to this knows that a cretin is the farthest thing from you, Gloria, in Southport, that one could possibly have. And I commend your spirit, and I hope it passes through your children to those grandchildren, because, you see, if you don't know what's going on, then the bad people who do know what's going on will have the field all to themselves. And here's my point, and I now know that you concur with it. If you don't know the other side of the story, how can you know that your side of the story is the correct one? You don't have to be Einstein to work that out. It's not rocket science. It's simple common sense. If there was a marital dispute, or if there was a dispute between two neighbors, if there was a dispute in the workplace, how could you possibly arrive at a sound judgment on who was right and who was wrong in those quarrels if you willfully precluded yourself and others from knowing one side of the story? That's how I like to put it, Gloria. It's simple common sense. Thank you very much for the call. My former colleague, and now going great guns as independent media, FaranFronczak from the United States, is up next to talk about all things Americana, but including that question that I flagged up earlier. You see, Faran, I've got a lot of high-nosed people. I've no doubt they're scratching their high noses right now, who say, I don't care about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. I am not interested. I can't choose between them. The problem is the masses in the United States, and I've discovered in enormous numbers here in Britain and in my own family, are interested in it. Not just because particularly Johnny Depp is, a big favorite with people. People really loved him, Jack Sparrow, and all that. But also because the issues being played out in this court case in the United States shed a light on other cases and on other allegations and on other people's lives. Because we're all familiar, aren't we, with the false accusations. You and I have been victims, not of the same kind of accusations, but of false accusations. We're both stamped, I think, with the false allegation that we are working for Russian state media, for example. So kindly, I know you've been covering the case. Kindly tell us your view on it now.
Well, and it's interesting, George, because like you said, many people are going to roll their eyes, but this is a case where this goes beyond just one international celebrity and his now ex-wife, Amber Heard. you had a former, what to kind of break it down for everybody, she wrote an article in the Washington Post saying, never naming Johnny Depp himself, but saying that she was a victim of sexual violence, and she kind of felt the wrath once she came forward. Well, even though she never named Johnny Depp, everybody assumed that's who it was. So the trial right now is taking place here in Washington, D.C., just over the river in Fairfax County, because that's where the Washington Post headquarters are. But the question is here is that, you know, she had multiple allegations. She has multiple recordings that she has made of her, you know, verbally abusing Johnny, but she thinks it's him. It's in a way trying to make her look better, but it makes her look worse. But you're seeing throughout this trial that victims of domestic violence can also be men. But unfortunately, George, in the last couple of years, especially since the Me Too movement, you had Amber Heard, who wrote this op-ed in the wake of Me Too. She was a spokesperson for Me Too. She had also the ACLU help write this article with her, you're finding. You're also finding Elon Musk has a place in this trial. She said when her and Johnny Depp divorced, she got $7 million, and she said she was going to donate it all to to the LA County Children's Hospital and the ACLU. Do you know who ended up donating money to the ACLU in her name? Elon Musk. So you have this whole dichotomy of what's going on. And again, people are like, oh my gosh, it's celebrities. But again, it's a really important case because it's showing this rise of woke feminism and how this Me Too movement had it where, you know, women were on this pedestal where they could say, he was abusing me, he was doing this to me, he was doing that to me, and men couldn't say anything. And that's where you're seeing now that it's one of these things. By the way, I have a cat that it wants to come in the conversation, but you're seeing it now where these you're seeing it now. Come on, Holly.
Beautiful. No, you don't have to get rid of them. No. We like cats.
Those little kittens.
I'm the top cat here.
Exactly, George. But yeah, so that's where you're seeing this conversation happen of, wait a minute, how many of these men were falsely accused? I even know there's many college rape cases here in the United States where a lot of prominent young athletes were accused by women during that movement. Now, could this be one of those things where it shines a light on some of these cases saying, wait a minute, this whole believe all women, did we jump too soon? Did we not look at the facts in this case? But again, in this particular case, George, every single day, there's just something new that's coming out of it. The biggest thing that you're seeing here, much like in the mainstream media, when you turn on court TV, everyone is pro Amber Heard. When you go on YouTube or any other independent media outlet, you have teams of lawyers, they call it LawTube, where there are all these lawyers streaming the trial, looking at the objections. And actually, I've learned so much watching their streams, and they're saying, wait a minute, these evidence isn't adding up. We had this whole testimony from Johnny Depp, and now she's saying, you know, from when he pushed her down the stairs to then she has pictures that she showed where she had a broken nose, and you're seeing, wait a minute, this nose doesn't look broken. And then the very next night, she's on the James Corden show and it looks completely fine. You know, so you're having all of these allegations come forward, and on LawTube, as they're saying on YouTube, everybody's pro Johnny Depp. So it's an interesting thing to see here in the United States, how when you turn on the mainstream media, they're still very much pro Me Too, believe all women, don't ask questions. On the independent side, people are like, wait a minute, we need to start asking questions, because this potentially lost, you know, he's suing her for $50 million or $100 million. She's countersuing, all from this op-ed. And again, the Washington Post is at the center of it. But then again, the ACLU is also at the center of it too, because they helped write the article knowing Elon Musk gave money in the name of Amber Heard. So it's a mind-blowing case, George.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know as much about it as you, so let me ask a couple of, as it were, idiot questions. But first, nobody should be automatically believed. That's absurd, that you automatically believe someone because of their gender. It is logically and intellectually an absurd position, but it has become the kind of consensus in these very woke times that we are living in. You know, I spent a lot of time in Parliament with somebody called Margaret Thatcher. She was a woman. But trust me, you'd be very foolish to have automatically believed her when she promised to bring harmony instead of discord, when she promised this and that and everything else and delivered none of it. So women tell lies just like men tell lies.
Sounds like another former leader today, not naming any names, President Zelensky.
Yeah, quite. But the my first question, daft question, is who makes the judgment? Is it a jury or is it merely one judge?
So this is a civil case, but there is a jury of 12, and it's actually very interesting. There's 6 men, 3 women. I believe 3 of the 5 men are Asian, and then there's an Asian woman, a black woman, and a white woman. And so the jury is very mixed up, but you actually have 5 Asians on the jury. But this isn't a kind of everybody has to agree here in the state of Virginia. It basically is where you can have 5 juries believe, it's a pro Johnny, 5 are pro Amber. And they kind of decide, they could, like, for example, by the end of the trial, they could say, hey, Johnny, you owe her $1, she owes you $1. Both of you get out of here. So civil case is very, very different from a criminal case. But yeah, this one is going to be a trial by jury. But the jury makeup in itself is another big question in all of this, because many talk about Asian culture. Here in the state of Virginia, they consider anything, even saying, George, you're an idiot, they consider that verbal abuse. Whereas other cultures, whether it be white, black, Asian, they're going to look at it a lot different.
Trust me, I've got a case, Faran, if that qualifies, if the bar is that low. Second question then. Second question. The jury, you've partly answered it, that the jury can award minimal damages, but then that means the winners are the lawyers. I'm assuming that both of these people are spending a king's ransom on lawyers. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And they're actually saying, Johnny Depp has so much money that he's willing to spend it just to clear his reputation. You have to remember, he was taken out of Pirates of the Caribbean because of all of these allegations. There was allegations that he really beat her up down in Australia when he was filming, but then you had it where his finger mysteriously was cut by a vodka bottle that she threw at him. Then you have allegations of in their LA apartment where he beat her up there and almost tried to throw her down the stairs. And it's the question of, well, where was security? These are celebrities. Everyone would be watching this. What's going on here? But at the end of the day, Johnny Depp lost a lot of movie gigs, and that's what they're trying to prove in this defamation trial. You remember when Johnny Depp recently sued The Sun because the title was Johnny Depp, the wife beater, and he went and sued the Sun for defamation and lost. So now with it coming here to the United States compared to British law with libel and defamation, the way you guys have it over there with your laws, it's a lot more, journalists have a lot more of a protections than they do here. But it's one of those things where, yeah, he's spending all this money because he said, I'm doing this to renew my reputation and bring it back to the actor that I was for, never harming a fly and, going to the children's hospitals dressed as Jack Sparrow to show, my humanitarianism. And that's where with this whole Amber Heard Johnny Depp case, you're seeing that, again, like you said, never believe people from the first set of facts. And unfortunately, we're seeing that with the Me Too movement, which has caused now a lot of questions of people saying, wait a minute, these big movements that come in like a hurricane, and all of a sudden we just have to believe all women, that looks like it might be coming to an end in the case with Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard.
Fascinating. I hope you'll come back and talk to us about it again when the verdict is in. When is that likely to be, Fran?
So this trial has been going on for 6 weeks. We are going into, right now there's a week off of the trial because the judge is actually at a conference this week that was already planned. They already knew this, but we're going to be going into the 4th week after this week. Now I have a show on my YouTube, Fair and Balanced, every Monday night where we go over the case of what happened, what the witnesses have said, and kind of the latest coming out of the trial every Monday night. And you can see it on my YouTube there. But yeah, we've got about 3 more weeks of this, George. So I'll see you in 3 weeks.
The lawyers have got quite a gig there. You probably earn as much as you would from Pirates of the Caribbean. So that's Faran Balanced.
Yep.
Faran, Faran Balanced, one word.
Yep. And really quick too, there's 2 petitions right now that are actually coming out because Amber Heard is scheduled to be in Aquaman 2. There's a change.org petition to bring back Johnny Depp for Pirates of the Caribbean. That has over 3 million signatures. There's a petition to kick Amber Heard out of Aquaman 2. It has over almost 4.5 million signatures, George. So you're seeing that hurricane is completely shifting gears and going in the opposite direction.
Well, unaccountably, I managed to miss Aquaman 1. I'll probably miss Aquaman 2 also.
Me too.
FaranFronczak, thank you very much indeed for a fascinating and punchy resume of that case. Should Sir Keir Starmer resign over hypocrisy? On Twitter, yes 79, up to, no 21, down to. On YouTube, yes 86, no 14, and on Telegram, yes 91, no 9. Not looking good for Keith Starmer. Richard is in Manchester. Let's hear from him. Richard, welcome back.
Good evening, George. Thank you ever so much for having me on your show again. I do appreciate it.
You're always welcome.
Very fascinated. I was very fascinated by the wife and husband team who came on, and how you handled that. And I never really thought about it, other than up in Scotland, of course, they gave the 16-year-olds, whether I'm allowed to call them kids or not, as we used to do in the old days. It doesn't really matter, but, you know, to give a kid, a 16-year-old, a vote can be manipulated in so many ways by whoever is...
Well, look, Richard, the nationalists would give the dogs in the street a vote if they could. A 16-year-old Chinese national in prison has a vote in Scotland on whether or not it should be an independent country, whether it should break up Britain. 16 Chinese in jail.
Right,
so they give anybody a vote. The captain of the Scotland football team doesn't have a vote because he works in Liverpool as a footballer for Liverpool, but the captain of the Lithuanian football team, who briefly lived in Edinburgh, had a vote. It's absurd.
George,
it's the theatre of the absurd, Richard.
Is it since Sturgeon took over?
Yes.
So she just has her own way and everything like that.
They have a minority of the vote, a minority of the seats, but they have more than the divided opposition of Tory, Labour, Liberal Democrat can possibly stop them. This is why I argued for a united front of those who wish to keep Britain together. Because only if it's a straight fight between separatism and remaining in Britain do we win. If everyone's cutting each other's throat, then the SNP can do what they like.
Yes, I see that. I see that now. But getting to the point that you allowed me on your show to say tonight was, Blair's involvement in what he's doing and sending people over to the EU and ostensibly preparing for a split up of the union, and then getting SNP into the euro, into Europe again by the back door. It absolutely stinks, and I do believe it's treasonous, and yet we have no way of defending his actions, and he's an absolute nobody now in the political world, and it's just money from him and Soros that's conducting the orchestra on this, George. That hardly seems ethical, if that's the right word, or things that would...
Yeah, but ethical and Tony Blair are not words that belong in the same sentence. But it's all down, I'm afraid, to the pusillanimity of the British government. see, John Curtice made the point earlier that, or he implied, that the courts might decide that Scotland can have another referendum, even though we won the last one, and that was supposed to be the one and only referendum, or at least the only one for a referendum. The government could change that in a day. They could introduce a bill into the House of Commons making secession referendums illegal in the country, except, say, every 30 or 40 years. Some would say they should be illegal altogether, but I'm not one of those. But at the very least, you said it was going to be a once-in-a-generation affair. Let's at least wait for a generation, which is regarded as 30 years apart. The government could legislate that, and then the courts could do nothing about it, because Parliament would have spoken on it and passed a law to make that the case. We call it an act like the one that they had in Canada, which it makes it clear that the hurdles you have to pass in order to break a country up should necessarily be onerous. It's not a small thing, after all, to break a country up. Thanks, Richard. William is in Montana. Who wouldn't want to go to Montana? Go ahead, William.
Hi, George. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. Thanks for talking to me today.
Welcome, sir.
Before, I have two things I just wanted you to chew on. I know where you're at with everything, but just the more they're chewed on, the more chance we have of people catching a clue. But before I do that, I just have to say that your show today gave me the best, and should have given everybody the best nickname for Joe Biden ever. He's got other Senator Credit Card and Sleepy Joe, but the El Cid thing was just, to me, unbelievable. That was great. Yeah. I can see the memes now.
There. We're almost there.
Well, I can see the memes now, can't you? With it, they could take any portrait or even a cut out of the movie and put Joe's face in the helmet and have him on the horse, and you could have whoever you want, Blinken, Winken, and Nodhead leading the horse whatever.
Let's challenge the audience now to produce that meme. That would be brilliant.
Yeah. But anyway, I just think, and I love to have you guys talk about it, but, they're trying to put everything in the dark they can, but not enough is being said about, first off, how NATO and the anti-Nord Stream bunch and the MIC actually started this conflict, this heavy conflict in Ukraine. It's been going on for 8 years. It's, you guys talk about that, but I would like to have, programs on just the Russia hate and why I think, to me, it's totally unjustified. And if people could back up to, say, 91 or 92 or whenever and come forward from them, it would really be helpful for people, let alone from 2014. If we could get them back that far, it would also be helpful too, but they try to shut everything off.
Well, especially on this day, William. Because on this day of all days, should we not be remembering the time when one of the greatest human achievements of all time, of all human history, was recorded? The defeat of Nazi Germany by your country, mine, and in particular, as the King of England himself acknowledged when he presented a sword to Stalin, as Churchill repeatedly acknowledged in the House of Commons, the monumental, titanic contribution that the people of the Soviet Union made to the defeat of Hitler fascism. Because if it had not been defeated, it would have won. And if it had won, we wouldn't be having this conversation, William. And if we were, we might be having it in German.
And now they're desecrating the
war
statues and things of the World War II Soviet Union people, and in northwestern, at least parts of Ukraine, they celebrate some of these Nazi general types,
Sure they do, yeah.
but Bandera
Sure they do.
and those kind of clowns. But it
Sure.
needs to be said much more. I'm waiting to see decent cracks in this unbelievable, stunning censorship, this sheep-herding, brainwashing, brainworm-giving garbage that we get here in the West is beyond belief. But here's the other thing. I remember I said I had two things that I wanted you to chew on, and I haven't heard enough about this. Only maybe one or two people have mentioned this out loud, that the USA does not have friends. We don't make friends. We dominate people and nations, and the more we can dominate them, the heavier we can dominate them, the better we like it. And I don't know that the EU is not just being economically and browbeaten down into a place where they're just at a really low ebb, where the U.S. could have even more of a boot heel on them, which is what the USA loves to do.
We are vassal states of a fading, failing United States empire. There's no need for me to chew on what you said. You said it brilliantly, eloquently, and it will have been heard and understood, I'm sure, by our audience in all countries. William, thanks for that. Now, last call. I've got to get you to donate. Otherwise, you'll switch on one Sunday and we'll not be here. It's as simple as that. It's MOATS.tv, www.moats.tv. You can then go to the donate button, preferably the recurrent donate button, and give, please. Not a lot. I'm not asking you to be generous. I'm asking you to be fair. It's fair that you give us £1 or $1 for this show until I've got a sponsor, which I'm earnestly looking for. And if you could go on to Super Chat, if you're on YouTube, that's the fastest way of all. Please donate on Super Chat. There's a slider, I think it's called, and you can press the amount that you are giving. So please, if you're on YouTube, go to Super Chat. Super Show, Super Chat. Let me take a quick break.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland, even the European, which he then owned, all over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret. I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
What a liar! What a monumental liar! Property and money means nothing to him, he said. I'm reading a book at the moment, a scholarly work, though with a considerable number of errors of fact that I know to be errors of fact. It's called Robert Maxwell, Israel's Super Spy. I know a lot of things in it are wrong, and I know there's a lot of dependence on witnesses I know to be undependable, because I've been involved in this case for 40 years. 40 years, imagine. Robert Maxwell was one of my biggest enemies, and that was long before we discovered he'd stolen everybody's pension. But if only 10% of that book is correct, just 10%, okay? 90% rubbish, 10% correct. If just 10% of that book is correct, then we don't know 1% of the real story of Robert Maxwell. I'm reading it daily. I've got it with me now. I'll read it in the car after this show. My eyebrows are constantly arched at the material that is within it. I'll bring it along next week or the week after and maybe do a little talk about it if people are interested. Anyway, that short documentary and lots of other interesting content is on patreon.com/George Galloway. Thanks very much if you already are supporting me there. Chapter 4 of my audio book, which is a history of the 1970s, easily the most interesting decade in modern history, in my view, then that's out tomorrow. Let's hit the phone lines then. VJ is in Stevenage in England. VJ, welcome.
Hi, George. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Go ahead.
One quick thing I wanted to talk about or ask about is, now that there's a heavy arms going into Ukraine, and the Ukrainians will start using it heavily on the Russians and maybe even across the border, the Russians will then have to hit back, even because the Russians have been doing it quite softly and being careful not to cause too much damage and so on. They just wanted to sort out a few things, what they call a sort of special operation. But now,
well, so much so, VJ, you've got a procession of, you've got Trudeau there today, Boris Johnson the other day, Bono and The Edge today. It seems to be quite safe for all these celebrities to go and walk around Kiev. So much for the Russian onslaught.
Exactly. They're going through on the trains. All these heavy, VIPs from all over the world are going in there, the so-called crazies. And now, if the Russians get a lot more damage, they're going to have to go heavily against the Ukrainians, and there'll be a lot more bloodshed. And this is all the West's fault.
For sure. Did we lose VJ? What a pity. He was making so much sense, but it is undoubtedly true that if we keep escalating the war with the provision of more and more money, more and more weapons, then obviously Russia will have to hit back harder. But I myself think that the war, at least this phase of the war, will be over relatively soon, with the circumstances I described earlier obtaining effectively the partition of the country. Should Keir Starmer resign? On Twitter, yes, 80%. On YouTube, yes, 86%. And on Telegram, yes, 91%. Never mind a curry, your goose is cooked, Keir. It is cooked. You are burnt toast. You are a broken papadum. Fayesa is in London. What would you like to say, Fayesa?
Hey, how you doing, man? Oh, it's a pleasure to speak to you, Mr. Galloway.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So yeah, I just read something the other week. It's about NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
Yeah.
Apparently, he will remain in his office for an extra year. He was meant to come out.
He was meant to quit and run the. I think he was going to run the Norwegian Central Bank. God save them.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's had such a diverse career in really good jobs, and I think NATO's had enough, really. I mean, he's just been repeating the same things, and I think you need something different. I mean, you can't just keep saying, 2% GDP, 2% GDP, like that's going to solve anything, because when war really hits. You can't really put a number on it. I mean, America,
especially as the GDP is about to shrink rather markedly.
Yeah, it's quite sad.
We're on the verge of a major recession.
Yeah, but I mean, the British people can handle recessions, and I say that really sensitively, but just because we've had so much. I mean, I've grown up in recessions. I mean, it's like I haven't really seen much progress in my life in the past 10 years. I mean, it's just really minuscule. So I mean, the British people can deal with that, but the problem is we don't. Like me as an individual, I just don't want to see the war continue in Ukraine. And if NATO is a problem, which Putin keeps saying, then just have a change. Have a change, because he's the guy. Everybody's saying it's America. Everybody's saying it's America. Okay, let's just try to entertain the fact that it's not America and it is NATO. Talk to this guy, and this guy is just saying the same thing over and over again. 2%. We're a defensive force. Blah blah.
But to be honest, brother, he is merely parroting his master's voice. NATO is the United States. Nobody else has an army. The Dutch are not going to fight Russia. The Italians are not going to fight Russia. Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, well, Sweden's not in it yet. Irish, British, all of our armed forces would fit into Villa Park. So none of us are going to fight Russia. It's America that's going to fight Russia if there's a war.
Yeah, but we can't keep going on about this fighting. We need to de-escalate, and the only way to de-escalate is by actually talking about possible solutions. What are the solutions? To be honest with you, I do sympathize with Ukraine in regards to the republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. I think that's a bit too much of an overstep for Putin. But the fact of the matter remains that there's been a war there in that region, particularly for 8 years. So whatever's going on in Putin's mind to legitimize the invasion, it's pretty well known, and it's getting more known as the time goes by, that there is a sincere pro-Russian separate region in Ukraine. And now, like in the beginning of the show, that you were suggesting that there is even a pro-Polish region in Ukraine. I mean, it's really sad to see
and a pro-Hungarian
Ukraine
and a pro-Romanian. It's complicated, Look, it's been a pleasure disagreeing with you. The hour is late. I need to press on, my friend. Call any time. Chuck is in San Diego now. I've been in San Diego, and wouldn't I like to be there now? Go ahead, Chuck.
Great show, George. My premise is the past is prelude to the present. Prior to U.S. entering World War I, there was the Creel Commission, which was used to propagandize the American public into getting into World War I, even though the prevailing was they didn't want to get into it, and that led to the Espionage Act of 1917, which Julian Assange is being persecuted under now. So the Disinformation Governance Board is nothing new. It's just more effective because due to social media, they can disappear someone permanently. And my final point is, this is something that you might know, but I'm sure 90% of your audience won't know, that after World War I in 1919, the United States sent 100,000 troops to Vladivostok to oppose
invade Russia.
Bolshevik.
To invade Russia.
Yeah, exactly.
It's only 100 years ago, you know. So we're not talking about in the last millennia. 100 years ago, Britain and America had hundreds of thousands of soldiers invading Russia to change its regime.
Yeah, this is something most people don't know, and if they did know, they would understand that Russia has legitimate interests in their protection there. Thank you for taking my call.
It's a wonderful call, absolutely wonderful. How clever the people who attend this global university of the airwaves really are. Should Keir Starmer resign? I'm afraid his goose is cooked. 80% yes, 86% yes, 91% yes. Hope you're watching, Keith. Now, there's a legend on the line, but before I bring him in, the Killing Kelly in Oxford was a splendid success. It seems to have spawned from someone who was in the audience and who is a promoter, something of a visit to Ireland, to the Irish Republic to show the film. I don't know if that's been fixed yet, but the next one I can announce is next month. So Killing Kelly will be on in Newcastle, that's Newcastle upon Tyne, on Monday the 27th of June at 7 p.m. in the Copthorne Hotel. So if you are in anywhere near Newcastle or are prepared to travel, then please write that down. Monday the 27th of June at 7 p.m. in the Copthorne Hotel. And before I bring in my final caller of the evening, don't forget that on Wednesday nights, no budget television, I warn you that in advance, but still pretty good, I think. The Galloway Show, only on YouTube at 10 p.m. London time on Wednesday nights, when I'll be, as it were, filling the slot that MOATS Extra tried to fill before we had to close it down. But there's a legend on the line. It is Kenny in Acton. Go ahead, Ken.
So, George, you've finally decided to unban me now. I'm allowed back on the show because I tried to call last week.
Well, you can't get on the week, Kenny.
I tried to call last week and it wouldn't even ring. It just went call ended, call ended, call ended. As soon as I pressed
I promise you it was nothing personal.
Oh, really? I thought you'd maybe taken umbrage at me having a different point of view for you the last time.
Not at all. That's what I want. I want people with a different point of view.
I'm also blocked from sending a super chat. I tried to make another donation to you tonight, and it says unable to send.
Well, somebody's out to get you, but it certainly ain't us, Kenny.
Okay, fair enough. Right, I just want to pick up for where I left off the last time. I watched Einsatz Group and I watched the first 2 episodes, and it was quite horrendous what happened in Western Ukraine. But that was 80 years ago, and the point I was making was I don't believe that Vladimir Putin's reason for invading Ukraine is because he thinks it needs to be denazified. Because what I said the last time is the numbers don't add up. Because Zelensky won 73% of the vote, and he's a Jew. If you go back to 1991 at the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was an independence referendum in Ukraine. 92% of Ukrainians voted for independence away from Russia. So there's obviously going to be a revolution in 2013 when the Ukrainian government tries to go back closer to Russia. When 92% of them...
Now you're talking nonsense. You were making sense up to then. Now you're talking nonsense. Trying to go back closer to Russia. If that's what you think the American coup in 2014 was about, and you're now justifying it quite explicitly, then you're right. You and I have a serious disagreement. But the difference between you and me is that I know what I'm talking about and you don't. You've got a Reader's Digest understanding of events in Ukraine. And the way you airily brushed aside the Einsatzgruppen Netflix documentary, the most devastating political documentary available on any subject in any country, anywhere, shows that you are not seriously looking at this. Don't tell me it was 80 years ago. Those murderers are being celebrated today. Streets are called after them. Hymns are raised to them. Statues are built to them. Now, today, not 80 years ago, Bandera's army crossed the Dnieper, is what the Ukrainian media said in 2014. You can back Bandera's army if you like. I never will. And I suspect the great majority of this audience agrees with me. I'd say it was a pleasure disagreeing with you, but truly it wasn't. Now you can keep donating. In fact, you can donate, I think, at any time on the website and on the YouTube, on the Super Chat. It's been a pleasure. I hope it was for you, and if it was, I'll see you on Wednesday night for the Galloway Show and next Sunday for MOATS.